The story begins in a dark, shadowy realm. A grim figure holding a small girl questions why he is interfering. He considers eating her but decides against it, realizing that isn't his intention. Instead, he decides to simply observe her until a bad habit appears, allowing her to do as she pleases for now. As the girl opens her eyes, the shadowy figure remarks that this is truly an unexpected observation. The scene shifts to the year 998 on the Canary Highway, where the Imperial army is aggressively inspecting travelers. A man desperately claims he isn't smuggling food and has official permission, but the soldiers laugh it off, declaring they will confiscate his goods and inspect him thoroughly. They mockingly tell him to be grateful for their protection against bandits. Just then, a young woman with long white hair and a sword at her hip walks by. Captain Samuel, the guard supervisor, eyes her greedily, noting she would make a fine prize and that her sword would fetch a great price. He orders a new recruit to go inspect her as his first task. The recruit yells at the girl to stop, but she feigns terror, claiming she is too scared to move. The recruit scolds her for using such a harsh voice on a girl, prompting the white-haired traveler to ask if he can tell a man from a woman, as she sees no other girl around. When the flustered soldier points out the actual girl nearby, she casually admits she can tell that much, confusing him further. Captain Samuel steps in, grabbing her and asserting the Empire's control over the area. He mocks her for not having lower-ranked knights to help her. The girl calmly identifies him as an Empire soldier and complains that everyone wears generic armor, making it hard to tell them apart without a guidebook. Samuel finds her audacity amusing and courageous, stopping his subordinate from retaliating. He tries to charm her by offering an escort due to dangerous beasts prowling the area, while subtly threatening her with the sword on her hip. The girl politely declines the escort, stating she desires to become a soldier of the Furnace Kingdom and is heading to the royal capital. When asked if she will be left alone, she sighs that the conversation is tiring. Suddenly, she swings her sword, slashing Captain Samuel across the chest. As he screams about her insulting the Empire, she notes how bloody and painful it is for him. She casually tosses a dagger into another soldier with a heave-ho, remarking that this is why she asked to be left alone. She muses that human beings are truly war-like creatures and wonders if her words aren't getting through clearly because human language is so complicated. As the remaining soldiers charge, she effortlessly dodges and cuts them down. Asking if it is her turn now, she unleashes a flurry of strikes, leaving the ground littered with defeated soldiers. Samuel, terrified, calls her a monster and runs away screaming for his mommy. The girl stops him, stating she has no reason to kill him if he answers a question. She asks where he learned his swordsmanship, noting it isn't something a girl could easily learn. Samuel reveals it was taught to him by someone named Zed. The girl doesn't recognize the name but warns that saying it might annoy her. A shadowy voice echoes in her mind, confirming the name Zed and asking where he is. Samuel, trembling but trying to muster courage, wonders why he isn't running. He laughs maniacally, claiming it is rare to encounter a monster in a war and challenges her, asking if she means him by the word monster. Declaring it the first time he's heard such big talk, the story continues with the white-haired girl, Olivia, politely introducing herself amidst the carnage. Captain Samuel, barely clinging to life, sarcastically agrees to remember her name, questioning if a monster like her even counts as an ordinary girl. He declares that while he has never broken his personal rule against killing women, he is willing to make an exception for her. Samuel charges forward, screaming about his signature move, the violent thrust, aiming directly for her heart with the confidence of a man who has definitely never fought a protagonist before. He yells that he has her, but the thrust misses entirely. Instead, Samuel finds himself impaled, collapsing in a pool of blood. As he dies, Olivia tilts her head, wondering what he was trying to steal, having completely misheard his battle cry. The narrator notes that Samuel, known as Samuel of the Violent Thrust, was one of the most powerful knights in the Empire, which makes his defeat even more embarrassing for him. At the Earth Belt Empire military base, Fort Casper, Southern Field Army Commander-in-Chief General Osvan is shocked to hear that Captain Samuel was killed. Southern Field Army Staff Officer Colonel Paris reports that it wasn't the work of the kingdom's army, but a monstrous girl with a black sword. The surviving soldiers are reportedly too traumatized to hold a normal conversation, though the girl claimed she was headed to the capital because she wants to be a knight. General Osvan worries that the kingdom is resorting to using monsters. Suddenly, the second Prime Minister, Darms, a hooded figure with an unsettling grin, interrupts the briefing. Colonel Paris tries to dismiss him, claiming the eyewitnesses are confused, but Darms ignores the dismissal to ask specifically about the Black Sword's features. Paris, sweating profusely, nervously replies that he only heard it was a black sword. D'Armes accepts this and leaves, thanking them for their time despite the lateness. As the Prime Minister departs, General Osvan notes how ghastly pale Paris looks. Osvan decides that if the information about the monstrous girl is true, they must send out spies to gather intelligence. As they talk, a shadow is seen moving independently like a living creature, and a hand is shown picking up a small object from the floor. Colonel Paris realizes with horror that for a moment, Prime Minister D'Armes' shadow moved on its own. Meanwhile, Olivia is skipping down the road, humming happily. She muses that humans are a cruel, warlike race that have a tendency to hunt the heads of their opponents to boast of their bravery and please their allies. She recalls Zed's advice that humans rejoice over their enemies' heads. She concludes that even if she isn't happy taking heads, the kingdom will surely be happy if she gives them the heads, so she decides to hire herself out as a volunteer soldier. She spots a massive structure in the distance and exclaims at its size. Recognizing the kingdom's coat of arms, a silver goblet with a gold and silver lion, she realizes she has arrived at the kingdom's military fortress. Flashback to a young Olivia pondering Zed's words that she was a living being called a human, though she found the concept of the third type of intelligent life to be full of difficult words. The shadowy figure known as Zed, whom the world's humans called the God of Death, clarified that he was not a human. Olivia recalled reading in a book Zed gave her about a terrible existence that indiscriminately harvested human souls, asking if that described her. Zed explained that they only reap souls from people who haven't developed a self, specifically dead humans. When Olivia asked if he would reap her soul too, Zed told her it was too late because she already had a self. Realizing the book was lying, the scene shifted to their home, a deserted temple in the middle of the forest known as the Gate of the Underworld, where Zed had found Olivia as a baby. Young Olivia was shown training with wooden swords. Zed critiqued her, noting that while she had no problems with agility, her movements were too direct and she was getting too absorbed in them. Zed stayed by her side during what he called observation, which encompassed both training and study time. During these sessions, Zed taught her a variety of essential life skills, including ways to catch prey, how to cook them, the continent's condition, language, magic, and strategy. Olivia questioned why she was training in sword fighting in hand-to-hand combat if there were no other people in the temple to kill besides her. Zed simply laughed and told her she would understand one day. Many seasons passed. One day, 15 years later, Olivia finally succeeded in cooking a meal without wrecking the stove, having mastered the output of her fireball magic. She called out for Zed, noting he was awfully late, but Zed suddenly disappeared. He left behind a letter, a brilliant red jewel, and a jet black sword shrouded in dark mist. The narrative then shifted to the broader world. In the lunar calendar year 995, the Earthbelt Empire's Emperor Ramuza II declared the unification of Duviderica, ending a 40-year peaceful era. The Empire sent a large army against the country bordering the Furnist Kingdom to the east, sparking a war that quickly engulfed the continent. By year 997, the balance of power collapsed as the Empire succeeded in taking the near-impregnable Fort Kiel, turning surrounding countries into tributary states. The Empire then set its sights on the Furnist Kingdom's absolute line of defense, Fort Gaul, knowing the kingdom was tumbling down a cliff. At Fort Gaul, Private Ashton Zenefielder sat in the mess hall, depressed. He had heard that the commander received orders from the king personally to be prepared to defend to the last, realizing the place was essentially a graveyard. Ashton lamented that despite being exempted from conscription due to good grades at a prestigious school, that right was stripped away, and he was now confident he was going to lose his life. Suddenly, a girl of unparalleled beauty appeared in the grim mess hall. Ashton wondered what she was doing there as she ate bread. She offered him her bread, asking if he wanted it, but then seemingly received his instead, thanking him profusely and declaring him a good human. Ashton was confused when she exclaimed that the bread was delicious, as he felt it was rude to say so when someone was eating so voraciously, noting that the bread there was honestly not that good compared to his mom's cooking. Olivia explained that it was the first time she had ever eaten bread, describing the outside as crispy and the inside as soft and squishy. She mentioned she had read about it in books and always wanted to try it. Ashton wondered if she was serious or messing with him, assuming any countryside village had bread, and asked where she was from. Olivia replied that she was from the temple deep in the forest called the Gate of the Underworld. Ashton had never heard of it, but Olivia decided it didn't matter. She thanked him for the bread, and they introduced themselves. He was Ashton, and she was Olivia. She promised to see him again if they got the chance. Just then, a soldier named Maurice interrupted Ashton, asking if he knew what kind of person that girl was. Maurice recalled a top-secret story about a volunteer soldier who recently arrived with a bag stuffed with Imperial soldiers' heads as souvenirs. Ashton realized with horror that the story actually happened. The scene flashed to Olivia, covered in blood and holding a bag of heads, identified as the rumored head-hunting volunteer soldier. Warrant Officer Olivia. Ashton was shocked that the lady he just talked to was a warrant officer, a rare rank for a volunteer. Maurice asked what they talked about, and Ashton mentioned the temple. Maurice speculated she might be a mage from the St. Illuminatus Church, the major religion worshipping the goddess Sidoresia. Ashton found it unexpected, believing magic didn't exist, but Maurice explained that while magic was said to be lost in ancient times, those who live in temples and strike fear with their names are called mages. Ashton concluded the church wasn't involved, and Maurice remarked that it was a very interesting conversation before leaving. At Fort Gaul under a heavy downpour, a figure leaps down from a tree, revealed to be Intelligence Unit Mirage. Second Lieutenant Zenon, who greets Sergeant Maurice. Maurice skips the formalities and reports that the kingdom's army hasn't made any obvious movements, seemingly just clinging to the fort to defend it strongly. When Zenon asks for numbers, Maurice estimates around 40,000 soldiers. Zenon commends the good work, but Maurice hesitates, mentioning one worrying thing: a girl who brought a bunch of Imperial soldier heads volunteered. Zenon is stunned when Maurice reveals this girl was the one who killed Captain Samuel. Maurice asks if she has silver hair, and upon Zenon's confirmation, the mystery of her sudden promotion to warrant officer is solved. Maurice recalls Ashton mentioning a girl who lived in a temple, leading him to fear she might be a mage. Zenon groans at the thought of fighting a mage, realizing they are in serious trouble if the stories are true. Suddenly, Olivia appears out of the rain, casually stating she isn't a mage though. Zenon and Maurice are shocked by her sudden appearance. Olivia cheerfully asks what they are doing out on a rainy day like this. Zenon immediately attacks, but Olivia simply greets them. Zenon confirms she is the silver-haired girl, while Olivia asks if they are doing night training and worries if they will catch a cold. Zenon lunges with a knife, impressed that she can completely dodge his attack, but Olivia continues to evade him effortlessly. Zenon thinks he has her, but she slips away again. In a flash, Zenon is slashed across the chest, crying out that it's impossible. Maurice watches in horror as Olivia remarks that Zed taught her a lot too, though she notes that overall, Zenon was too slow. She admits she enjoyed the little spar a bit. She then tells Maurice she likes the rain, asking if he doesn't think it's wonderful. She points out that even if blood splatters all over him, the rain will rinse it off and he'll be all clean again. Terrified by this logic, Maurice turns and runs away, only to trip and fall flat on his face. Olivia apologizes, explaining that he ran away so suddenly she cut his legs off without thinking. She holds up his severed legs, offering to give them back for now. Maurice, staring at his own limbs, realizes the truth: she heard them talking earlier, so she knew he was a spy from the beginning. Olivia salutes cheerfully, declaring she is taking him as a prisoner of war. She asks Maurice if she is exactly like a soldier now, but Maurice has already fainted from the shock. Fort Gallia. Soldiers stare in horror as Olivia strolls into the southern headquarters, carrying a severed head in one hand and the legless body of Maurice in the other. Inside the interrogation room, Lieutenant Colonel Otto sits with General Paul, reviewing the testimony of the now critical spy. Otto confirms that Olivia successfully dealt with the man. Olivia cheers that the ordeal is finally over, complaining about how many times she had to repeat herself. Otto scolds her for her lack of manners, which she loudly acknowledges. When asked how she identified the spy, Olivia explains she was out for a walk because she loves the rain, conveniently forgetting that going out at night was prohibited. She describes spotting Maurice scurrying like a rat, following him, and eavesdropping on his conversation with another person to confirm he was a spy. Otto decides to let the curfew violation slide this time, but warns her not to break the rules again. He offers her a reward, and Olivia immediately asks for delicious bread from the capital. Otto is baffled by the request. Olivia explains that Ashton told her the capital's bread is the best, describing the crispy outside and soft, sticky inside with sparkling eyes. Otto tries to ask who Ashton is, but Olivia unhelpfully replies that Ashton is just Ashton and a human. Frustrated that his questions aren't getting through, Otto is interrupted by General Paul, who suggests cake is even better than bread. Olivia's eyes light up at the word cake. She hugs the general, calling him Grandpa Paul, and admits she has read about cake in books but never eaten it. General Paul is charmed by her enthusiasm, while Otto looks on annoyed. Paul asserts his authority as the one in charge of the fort and tells Otto to watch his language. Olivia playfully switches between formal and informal address, calling him Your Excellency and then just Otto. Otto grumbles that she lacks common sense like a country girl, while Paul thinks she needs a proper education, though he admits she is cheerful and good-looking. Later, Otto confirms that the spy's body was indeed cut in half before interrogation. Wondering if Olivia truly possesses the strength to do such a thing, he considers assigning an abandoned operation to her. The scene shifts to the year 998. The kingdom has lost the power to fight back. King Alphonse Sam Garamond makes a difficult decision to send the First Army, led by the invincible veteran General Cornelius, to recapture Fort Kiel. In the royal capital Fez, officers discuss the king's absolute commands. They note that if the decision had been made a year earlier, the circumstances might be different, but now recapturing Fort Kiel is the only point to the siege. At the Fort Letitia Strategy Conference room, Lambert the Brave, the First Army's executive officer, suggests assaulting Fort Casper instead. He argues that while Fort Kiel was seized quickly by the Empire and is now a stronghold, Fort Casper was treated as old and abandoned by the kingdom. Now, the Empire uses Casper as a base to demonstrate their prowess and attack Fort Gallia. In the meeting, Lambert outlines the numbers. The First Army has 25,000 troops and the Seventh Army has 30,000, totaling 55,000 against Fort Casper's 50,000. He confidently claims they can finish any battle quickly. Colonel Nainhalt, the First Army's adjutant, observes that Lambert seems awfully relaxed despite the kingdom being on the brink of destruction, though he sarcastically respects Lambert's keen insights. General Cornelius points out that Paul was ordered to defend Fort Gallia, so the Seventh Army won't move, asking if Lambert intelligently thought that out. Cornelius muses that Lambert was once praised as the invincible general, but age has caught up with him. Lambert proposes drawing a strong defensive line at Fort Gallia if they recapture Casper and asks if the Seventh Army will cooperate in retaking Fort Kiel. Nainhalt notes that the Empire has about 80,000 troops at Fort Kiel, and with their vassals, the number approaches 140,000. He doubts they will get assistance from the Third and Fourth Army. Cornelius states it is impossible to retake Fort Kiel. Lambert slams his hands on the table, angry, asking if they really want to dig their own graves in front of Fort Kiel, insisting the king understands the situation well. Cornelius dismisses the meeting, telling them to discuss the details between themselves while he informs His Majesty. Nainhalt asks permission to go to Fort Gallia as a liaison, citing a few things he is worried about. Nainhalt reflects that he didn't report certain details during the meeting as they weren't necessary, but he finds a specific report hard to believe, that the abominable Captain Samuel was butchered by a 15-year-old female volunteer soldier. Meanwhile, in Lieutenant Colonel Otto's office, Olivia is late. Otto yells at her for being more than 30 minutes late. Olivia cheerfully declares the reason as clocks. She explains she doesn't have a splendid watch like Otto's adjutant, so she can't accurately tell time. Exasperated, Otto tells her not to make excuses and gives her his own pocket watch. Olivia is surprised and asks if she can have it. Otto tells her to be careful with her manners when talking to superiors. Olivia happily accepts the gift, calling it Adjutant Otto's pocket watch, and plays with it, opening and closing the lid with delight. Otto tells Olivia to keep the watch in her pocket, to which she cheerfully agrees. He then clears his throat and announces that he has a special duty for her. A text box explains that special duties are confidential, highly difficult tasks given to only a few. Otto notes that he specifically called her to say that this time, since they are out of time, she has to decide right now. Olivia salutes and declares that she won't refuse, citing military rules that make refusing special duties impossible. Otto thinks to himself that he knew she wouldn't refuse, just as he thought, and aloud he says that was well said. Otto points to a map on the wall where Fort Lambert is crossed out with the word Despuasel. He tells her that her assignment is to recapture Fort Lambert. Olivia asks if that is the fort that is crossed off. Otto confirms, explaining that 10 years ago they abandoned the fort. Olivia questions why they would recover it after throwing it away and marking it for disposal. Otto explains that manners, well, it is fine, but the situation is that the fort is now home to a group of bandits, and they want to take it back from them. Otto elaborates that the situation has changed a lot in the past 10 years. Their army has been backed into a corner against the Empire, and in order to defend against their invasion, they need to use Fort Lambert. He explains that in the past, they sent platoon-sized forces against the bandits living in Fort Lambert, but all of them were beaten and failed. According to the testimony of survivors, the majority were killed by a veteran bandit called the Long Spear Bearer. Otto thinks to himself that individually, she is likely the strongest in the 7th Army, and if he were to send her after him, she might be able to handle that Long Spear Bearer. Olivia smiles and asks to sum it up she is to go and kill all the bandits. Otto sweats nervously. He has a brief flash of a bloody massacre and thinks to himself about how humans love to see the heads of their enemies. Olivia asks if she needs their heads. Otto replies that well, simply said, that is it. Olivia acknowledges the order. Otto asks heads, and she confirms, saying yes, heads. A caption announces that the innocent yet wicked swordswoman is heading out for the sake of cake. Olivia salutes and declares she is heading out to recapture Fort Lambert as ordered. Otto tells her all right, he will be expecting good results, and that she may leave. As she turns to go, Otto thinks to himself that no, that is okay, and the heads are unnecessary. Olivia says yes sir and walks out. Otto stands alone in the office, looking exhausted, and suddenly realizes with a sweat drop that he should have asked when the cake is arriving, having forgotten to arrange the reward she wanted. Less than 3 days later, the special platoon led by Olivia marched onwards toward Fort Lambert, a fort overrun by bandits. While Olivia marched with boundless energy, claiming she wasn't tired at all, her subordinates were struggling. The group consisted of 20 greenhorns with only 2 months of experience and an unknown female commander. Given that the survival rate for new recruits during their first engagement was only 1 in 3, the soldiers were terrified they would meet their demise there. Olivia suddenly called for a short break, confusing the soldiers who were trying to keep up with her superhuman pace. One soldier, trying to save face, claimed he wasn't tired, but another finally snapped, yelling that they didn't have as much physical strength as she did. Olivia apologized, admitting she hadn't noticed their fatigue, because she wasn't tired herself. Ashton was internally relieved that someone had finally spoken up, thinking the soldier was a god for voicing their shared pain. Olivia realized she had been oblivious to their intentions, and when Ashton tried to claim he was looking out for their well-being, Olivia clarified that she just wanted to take a break for herself, leaving Ashton flustered that he couldn't take the moral high ground. During the break, Ashton enjoyed his black bread with mustard and dried meat, declaring it absolutely delicious. Olivia stared at him with intense, unblinking hunger. Ashton realized she had eaten all her rations and offered her some of his food. Olivia accepted gratefully, calling Ashton a kind person while worrying about what he would eat if a ferocious beast attacked. As she ate, Ashton worried about their remaining rations. Suddenly, a roar shook the forest. A horned lion, a beast notorious for being extremely ferocious and skillful with its huge horn, appeared before them. The soldiers panicked, screaming that it was an ugly unicorn and that they were done for. Ashton yelled for Olivia to escape because the beast was going to eat her. Olivia just laughed, calling Ashton a funny guy, and said it wasn't a big deal. As the beast charged, Olivia calmly dodged and thrust her black sword directly into its mouth, killing it instantly. The soldiers stared in shock, noting that her sword had been encased in a black fog. 3 days later, the soldiers treated Olivia like a goddess, offering her their dried meat in a congregation-like manner. Private Gel Striker noted the black fog around her sword. The soldiers tried to speak formally, but Olivia found the honorifics annoying. She reminded Ashton that he had spoken normally when they met in the canteen. Ashton, realizing she hadn't known he was her superior back then, forbade her from using honorifics. The soldiers began referring to her as a war goddess, though a small caption corrected that she wasn't actually a goddess. A soldier then asked why a black haze came out of her sword. Just then, they spotted Fort Lambert. Olivia ran ahead, borrowing a spear from a soldier and hurling it with precision to take out a bandit lookout instantly, shouting, "Jackpot!" The soldiers noted that the bandits were oddly quiet for such a big castle. A man with long hair, the bandit leader, appeared on the wall, noting he had heard a sound. The soldiers wondered if he was a bandit since he had been watching them. The leader remarked that the leader of the group was just a small woman. Olivia politely introduced herself, asking him to take care of her, which the leader found to be a very polite introduction. The bandit leader, introducing himself as Wolf, sat casually on the fort wall holding a long spear. He asked if they had come to take back the fort and demanded their reason for being there. Olivia's soldiers trembled in fear behind her. Olivia calmly explained that they came to take back the fort because it was their mission, though she admitted it was strange that the army abandoned the castle only to want it back now. Wolf laughed, acknowledging she had the gist of it. He then rudely asked if they would kindly turn around and head back home, complaining that it was a pain to get rid of corpses and pointing out that usually they were the ones disposing of bodies. Olivia smiled brightly and replied that it was troublesome to clean up separately, so they could just leave the bodies to everyone there, implying she would kill them all right there. Wolf was taken aback, asking if she seriously meant clean up in that way, and if she hadn't understood his threat, he declared that she was either very powerful or a damn fool, boasting that not a single person who talked to him like that had ever survived. Olivia realized with delight that this meant she was the first one. Wolf lunged forward with his spear, prompting Ashton to scream her name in panic. However, in the blink of an eye, Olivia closed the distance, pressing her sword right against Wolf's throat. Wolf sweated profusely, admitting that while a long spear was good for fighting at a distance, it was useless when the distance suddenly disappeared. Olivia cheerfully asked if that meant a sword was definitely the best. Wolf immediately surrendered, shouting that he got it and gave up, ordering his men to leave the fort. Olivia, however, said that was no good. Holding her jet black sword, she relayed her orders, stating that she didn't need his neck specifically, but she was told to kill everyone there. Ashton looked on in horror, realizing that this brutal order must have come from Otto. Before Wolf could react, Olivia thrust her sword through his mouth, killing him instantly. Blood sprayed everywhere as the soldiers watched in shock. Covered in blood, Olivia let out a sigh of relief, saying, "Phew, I guess." The remaining bandits stared in terror. Olivia remarked that she should quickly finish up the rest of them. If the bandits had originally planned to mince the kingdom soldiers, drink on top of their dead bodies with their comrades, and test out a new sword, feeling happy about the prospect. However, those plans were thoroughly ruined. Olivia walked through the carnage, asking if they were finished playing tag. A surviving bandit begged to be let go, screaming that he was begging her. Olivia looked at him and remarked that it was kind of lonely to return back alone, noting that this human was so lonely he was crying. She then struck him down. Olivia raised her sword high, her shadow reflecting the silhouette of death itself, and asked if they saw, stating that was just like she said. The soldiers watched in awe, commenting on how strong Commander Olivia was. They admitted it was amazing how she charged at that ugly unicorn and slaughtered it, and unbelievable how she dealt with the bandits when they were surrounded. They felt pathetic that they couldn't do anything but watch her while shaking, realizing they were truly pathetic. Deciding that it was their job to at least do that much, they resolved to ask her to train them so they could help her fight next time. The soldiers were shown practicing drills with wooden swords, splitting into attackers and defenders to see opponents' moves. They cheered for their captain and their Valkyrie, eating and drinking together. Olivia was seen happily eating a large piece of meat, declaring that their Valkyrie said so herself. Later, at the Royal Army stronghold Gallia in the commander's office, Olivia reported for duty right on time with 3 seconds left on the clock. Otto yelled at her to put away the watch. General Paul apologized for calling her there when she just returned, praising her for doing very well in her last duty. Olivia thanked him very much. Paul asked if she had trouble dealing with the skilled spear user amongst the mountain bandits. Olivia replied that he wasn't very good at it, while Ashton wondered if he was imitating a fish. A memory of Fort Lambert flashed by, showing Olivia fighting the bandit leader. Back in the present, Otto remarked that a skilled spear user bandit was nothing to her. Olivia admitted she didn't really remember the fight because everyone dropped dead after one attack, and she was having so much fun talking she almost forgot about it. Paul laughed and realized they died after just one swing. Paul then presented Olivia with a box of cakes, explaining that was the reason he called her there. Olivia was thrilled, asking if it was cake. Paul confirmed, and Olivia took a bite, exclaiming that it was as if the cake was saying it tasted super delicious and would melt her cheeks. She worried about what to do if it actually melted her cheeks, but decided to think about it when it happened, noting it was sweet and soft. Olivia then held out a cake to Otto, asking if he perhaps wanted to have a bite too. She clarified that unfortunately, she couldn't give him one because it was a gift from General Paul. Otto, furious, yelled at her, asking when the hell someone asked her for a cake and shouting that the officer room was not the place to eat cakes. Olivia recommended he see a doctor as soon as possible, noting there was no mistaking that this was the officer room and that humans sometimes lose memories when they get hit on their heads. She thought to herself that Colonel Otto also wanted to eat the cake, so if it was only one cake, she wouldn't mind sharing. Otto yelled again, asking if she was going to hit it after all. Olivia cheerfully said yes, sir, and that she would go to her own room to enjoy the cakes. Neinhardt commented that she was certainly an odd girl. Otto complained that she was just a rude girl with no manners or common sense. Neinhardt noted that she was totally different than he'd expected, having heard of her before. Otto realized that the person who killed Samuel was a girl like her, with silver hair and a black sword. He realized she took revenge for his best friend. Paul suggested that since she successfully took that fort, They could proceed with their plan if they recognized her skill and achievements. Otto complained that she spoiled her with the cakes. Neinhardt told Otto not to say that, noting she was absorbed in eating her cupcakes right now. Paul argued that they had to use her to the best of their abilities to increase the success chance of the mission as much as possible. Otto grumbled that at the moment, she was the strongest pawn in the 7th platoon. Neinhardt observed that Otto was a very realistic person who didn't make subjective evaluations of enemies or friends. Neinhardt stated that the success of the operation lay in her hands, but they needed a competent lieutenant to work with her since he couldn't find anyone suitable yet. He said he had a suggestion and knew someone suitable for that position. Several days later at Kingdom Fort Gallia, a new girl arrived on the battlefield. Officer Claudia Young reported for duty to Colonel Otto. Otto noted she was the person Colonel Neinhardt recommended. Claudia asked for the details regarding her sudden transfer from the 1st platoon to the 7th platoon. Otto explained that Chief Warrant Officer Claudia was being assigned as Olivia's vice commander. Claudia realized that Neinhardt didn't tell her anything and that they were just pushing their job onto her. She muttered about Neinhardt, her cousin, not even discussing it with her before deciding. As she left, she thought to herself that, to be honest, Olivia was a bit of a handful girl who had problems with her manners and common sense. Claudia leaves Colonel Otto's office, having been instructed to visit Warrant Officer Olivia in her room. Otto awkwardly asks her to forget his earlier comment about Olivia being cute, which he quickly apologizes for. Claudia checks her reflection, satisfied with her appearance, and proceeds to the room. Upon knocking, a voice from inside asks if that is Claudia. Claudia enters and formally introduces herself as Lieutenant Claudia Young, the newly assigned vice commander, noting that Colonel Otto had told her about Olivia. Inside, Claudia is stunned to find Olivia lounging on the floor surrounded by scattered books. Olivia casually introduces herself from her prone position, stating she will be in Claudia's care. Claudia is internally screaming about the lack of manners and common sense, wondering if this is a test. She notes the sheer volume of books in the room. Olivia explains that Ashton told her about something, and thanks to that, all her reward money from General Paul is already gone. She asked for books to be sent from the capital because books are expensive. Claudia realizes Olivia really likes books. When Claudia asks who Ashton is, Olivia unhelpfully replies that Ashton is Ashton, and he's a human, adding that Claudia sounds just like Colonel Otto. Claudia realizes Olivia is genuinely hard to handle and wasn't joking earlier. Olivia asks if her words are hard to understand, and when Claudia apologizes for asking something obvious, Olivia says she is glad that isn't the case. Olivia then dismisses her, saying the introduction is over and Claudia can leave. Claudia politely excuses herself, offering assistance if needed, and closes the door. Outside, Claudia angrily vows to make her cousin Neinhardt pay for dumping this difficult assignment on her. Inside, Olivia reflects on Zed's teaching that knowledge is what separates humans from animals. She remembers how Zed made her read constantly in the temple. She recalls a time she tried to catch a she-fairy comet she read about, but lost control of her fire magic and destroyed the hearth. She had blamed the mischievous fairy, only to discover days later that Zed was the one secretly repairing the room with magic. Zed was the comet, all along. In the present, Olivia feels a pang of loneliness, realizing that while she is in the kingdom, Zed is not there and she wonders where he is. In the royal capital Fizz at Letitia Castle, King Alphonse Galman shouted furiously at General Cornelius. The king was outraged that Cornelius wanted to split the 7th platoon to attack Fort Casper while they were already tasked with protecting Fort Gallia, arguing that the platoon would be spread too thin. He ordered the 1st platoon to take down the fortress immediately instead. When Cornelius calmly stated that if the king would not listen to his words, he might as well quit the military since he was no longer useful to the kingdom. The king panicked. Realizing he couldn't afford to lose the unbeatable general, the king hastily gave permission for the 1st platoon to cooperate with the 7th platoon to capture Fort Casper. Following the king's order, the 7th platoon received commands to cross the Istishi River and advance along the Canary Road into enemy territory. At the Imperial southern base, Fort Casper, the commanders observed the kingdom's march, assuming they were aiming for Fort Casper. A commander noted that General Osvan's plan to attack Fort Gallia had been approved by the emperor. Emperor Ramuza XIII, accompanied by the shadowy Prime Minister d'Armes, was informed of the situation. D'Armes advised the emperor to simply observe the kingdom's movements for the time being. Inside the imperial command, a commander praised the perfection of their plan. They discussed how the notorious Mad Samuel had been defeated by a young girl wanderer, which was hard to believe but true given the bigger picture didn't change much. They concluded there was no better time to attack Fort Gallia than now, with 50,000 men in high morale. General George, captain of the Armored Front Cavalry Squad, eagerly wanted to show the Empire's might. However, Second Lieutenant Zenon noted that he hadn't received any message from the spy he left in Fort Gallia, suspecting the spy had been captured or killed. Colonel Paris suggested they show their power to the 7th Squad. The Imperial commanders identified the Iris Plain as the perfect battlefield, located near Cross Valley and Ark Forest, and close to Fort Casper. They planned to unleash their armored cavalries on the 7th Platoon. Colonel Paris cautiously suggested requesting reinforcements from Fort Kiel to be safe. General George exploded in rage, calling Paris a fool and a coward for suggesting reinforcements when they had overwhelming numbers. He shouted about the shame of needing help, prioritizing his reputation over the safety of his men. Paris internally noted George's vanity but apologized aloud. George quickly calmed down, dismissing Paris's strategic concern, and called for a toast. The next morning, all 50,000 Imperial soldiers from Fort Casper marched toward the Iris Plain, chanting loyalty to the Emperor. Meanwhile, a week prior, the kingdom had been secretly moving soldiers bit by bit into Lambert Fort, garrisoning about 3,000 troops without the Imperials noticing. Olivia, now commander of the Special Squad of the United Army, led these 3,000 cavalries into the Ark Great Forest. Riding alongside Claudia, Olivia cheerfully told her vice commander that her tense face was a waste of her beauty. Claudia, flustered, replied that even a compliment sounded like a grudge coming from Olivia. Olivia innocently asked why, then complimented Claudia's riding skills on a horse famous for being hard to tame. Olivia explained that she had tried to ride the ugly unicorn, the horned lion, when she was a little girl, though it had been rampaging wildly. She contrasted it with horses, which she found very quiet. Claudia was horrified, realizing Olivia was talking about the disaster-level monster Type 2. Olivia mimicked the beast, calling it cute, and stood up on her horse to prove how docile animals could be. Claudia screamed at her to stop, reminding her that she was the commander of 3,000 men in the middle of a secret operation. Despite the chaos, Claudia observed Olivia's relaxed demeanor and convinced herself that this lack of nervousness was a calculated act to keep the soldiers calm before the decisive battle. The strategy was set. First, the unit would cross the Ark Great Forest to flank the Imperial soldiers in the Iris Plain. Then, they would join forces with the main squad clashing head-on with the enemy and charge together. This daring plan aimed to destroy the Imperials in one fell swoop, focusing entirely on the element of surprise. Warrant Officer Olivia's role was defined clearly. She was to take the enemy's head silently. Claudia's role was equally critical but vastly more stressful, as she was tasked with leading Olivia during her duty. Claudia sweated internally, reminding herself that the most important thing was balance. She tried to convince herself it would be all right and pondered why she was assigned this specific post. Moreover, the timing for that important charge had been given to her. But the pressure was immense. While Claudia was mentally spiraling about the heavy responsibility and forcing herself to maintain vigilance, Olivia completely shattered the serious atmosphere. She cheerfully asked if the guys were tired or wanted to take a rest. Then, riding her horse with a beaming smile as if they were on a picnic, she asked if the commander was already hungry, leaving Claudia to wonder how she was supposed to manage a commander who treated a surprise attack like a lunch break. The soldiers of the Special Squad reminisced about their time during the Fort Lambert recapture mission, noting how they could only stand there trembling back then. They felt stronger now after Commander Olivia's training, though Claudia thought they were being naive to think it would be easy. She believed they would be useful this time, but Olivia bluntly told them they would have to go through long and painful training to become strong. She pointed out that pointing out their weakness right before a battle would only discourage them. Olivia then teased Jail, telling him he wasn't as strong as he thought and should be careful not to get killed. When the soldiers reacted with shock, Olivia turned her attention to Ashton. She recalled hearing about him from the book incident and asked how weak he was. Ashton, flustered, insisted he was giving his best effort. Olivia suggested that he looked more suited to be a strategist, noting he was strong when playing chess during breaks. This comment sent Ashton's morale soaring while his combat confidence plummeted. Meanwhile, the soldiers looked around alertly, which Olivia noted meant they didn't look like new soldiers anymore. She wondered if that was true, admitting she got kicked out of the castle before she could teach them much. As they rode, Olivia wondered what reward General Paul would give her once the mission was finished. Claudia watched her, seriously wondering who exactly she was and realizing she had talent in instructing too. At the Kingdom's army camp, commanders noted there was no movement around Fort Kiel. The joint army of Paul and Lambert prepared as the enemy marched toward the Iris Plain with about 50,000 men. General Paul worried if the strategy led by a 15-year-old girl would be all right, thinking it would be pathetic to call for reinforcements in their first battle. Soldiers nearby gossiped about the beautiful girl who elegantly fights on the battlefield, calling her the War Maiden and the silver-haired War Maiden. Paul blushed intensely at the perfect nickname, acting like an old man boasting about his granddaughter, which the soldiers found bewildering. The Southern Empire Army led by General Oswan arrived at the Iris Plain to intercept the 7th Platoon. The King's army headed by General Paul arrived 1 day later. The battle formations were set with the Empire on one side and the Kingdom on the other. The battle was initiated by the armored cavalry charging in, marking the beginning of the Battle of Iris Plain. General George of the Empire mocked the Kingdom's army as too weak as they clashed. The Kingdom's forces appeared to retreat, and Vice Commander Silas reported this to George. George saw an opportunity to break their formation in the middle and aim straight for their head commander. He promised his proud armored cavalry soldiers that they could get anything they wanted if they got the enemy commander's head, leading a reckless charge. On the Kingdom side, Neinhart identified the charging troops as their famous armored cavalry. Lambert asked if Neinhart had prepared something special for them. Neinhart, calm as ever, ordered the archers to fire at will. Flaming arrows rained down on the charging horses. The main goal wasn't to burn the enemy, but to scare the horses, since no animal in the world doesn't fear fire. The horses panicked and reared up, throwing their riders and halting the charge. As time passed, the fighting calmed down bit by bit, with battles on the sides being less intense than the center. The first day ended in a draw as both sides blew their horns to signal retreat when the sun started to set. The Empire lost 2,000 men while the Kingdom lost 3,000. That night at the Kingdom's camp, Otto found Paul still working. Paul admitted he couldn't help but get excited during a battle. They discussed the losses and the strength of the armored cavalry. They noted that the 1st platoon used fire arrows to scare the horses, but worried that if rain fell, the fire arrows would lose their effectiveness. They also waited for the special squad to arrive. On the second day of the battle, since both sides were more careful about their central formation, the fighting in the center wasn't as intense as the first day, shifting the main battle to the sides. Lieutenant Elman of the Kingdom Army watched as the enemy forces began to retreat. His vice commander, Russ, eagerly suggested that they should chase them down immediately. Elman agreed that failing to pursue would raise suspicions, so he ordered the cavalries to move forward with about 400 men. However, he instructed them not to chase too far and to retreat as soon as the situation looked bad, muttering to himself that he was just talking to himself to calm his nerves. The entire strategy relied heavily on the element of surprise, a plan known only to a select few commanders. General Paul and Colonel Otto discussed the situation, noting that normally they wouldn't attack the enemy until the ambush was sprung. They had already told the individual commanders not to go too far. Since they were planning to capture Fort Casper, they wanted to keep their losses to a minimum. Paul felt the weight of the situation pressing on him. He realized that being too passive would disrupt the soldiers' morale, but he also had to skillfully hold the enemy attack while fighting with his full power, all without letting his own men or the enemy get suspicious. The stress gave him a massive headache, making him realize this was harder than he thought. His mind drifted back to when he met Warrant Officer Olivia by coincidence in the hallway at Fort Gallia. He remembered soldiers fawning over her, calling her the silver-haired War Maiden and marveling at her beauty and strength. Paul reflected on the fact that the key role in this entire battle was entrusted to that 15-year-old girl. He wondered what kind of face the enemy would make if they knew the truth. The battle on the Imperial Army's right wing descended into chaos under the command of Mintis Ora Ikes, a distant relative of the royal family. Mintis screamed at his subordinates for showing their faces, displaying the emotional stability of a spoiled child. Vice Commander Major Rayones watched in despair as Mintis ordered a pathetic strategy of sending only 500 men to scatter the enemy, resulting in a 70% loss rate. Terrified of being scolded by his father for a lack of achievements, Mintis demanded the cavalry be sent out again without any real strategy. Realizing that Major George was useless in this situation, Rayones decided to take matters into his own hands to save the situation and show off his ability. He ordered the 3,000 cavalrymen to be split into 3 squads to attack the center of the enemy formation. On the Kingdom side, Lieutenant Elman, leading the left wing, observed the persistent enemy attacks. He realized the enemy was doing the exact same thing as before and suspected a trap or a shift in strategy. Instead of falling for it, he ordered a withdrawal to reform the battle line, realizing the previous attack was merely bait. He pulled his archers back and brought heavy soldiers with spears to the front to fill the gaps. Meanwhile, Mintis, watching from afar, delusionally believed the kingdom army was panicking and celebrated his own strategic genius. Mintis declared he would take command of the whole army to eliminate the scattered soldiers personally. Rayos tried to object, noting that standard cavalrymen didn't have the power to do what the heavy armored cavalry could, but Mintis ignored him, desperate for an achievement. When Rayons tried to stop him, he was threatened with treason for disobeying a royal order. Mintis ordered the charge toward the main enemy army. As they charged, Rayons felt something was strange about how easily the enemy was reacting, but it was too late. He looked out and realized with horror that the enemy army was already surrounding them. Rayos realized they had completely lost the battle of trickery and fallen for a trap. He ordered a hasty retreat to minimize losses. Back at the Imperial camp, Mintis was busy celebrating a victory that didn't exist, drinking and laughing. Rayos arrived, shouting that the enemy was encircling them, but Mintis, clearly drunk or just delusional, offered him a drink and asked if he wanted to join the party. A soldier fell off his horse in panic, but Mintis thought they were just faking it. Rayus screamed that they had fallen for the trap. Another soldier tried to explain that the situation had turned for the worse, but Mintis threatened to cut his head off if he kept making jokes. The soldier finally screamed that their army was completely surrounded, and Mintis finally looked terrified as the enemy appeared right before them. Mintis blamed Rayons for the disaster. Rayons, accepting his fate, decided to make a stand to buy time for Mintis to escape, with his loyal men staying by his side. Elman observed that the enemy was taking the bait. He decided to leave an opening for them to escape rather than cutting off their route and forcing them to fight to the last man, which would cost too many of his own soldiers. He noted that the enemy's next strategy relied only on brute force, which was a huge letdown compared to their earlier charge. The battle ended on the second day with a total victory for the kingdom. The kingdom lost 2,000 men, while the Imperial army lost 5,000. Amidst all this bloodshed and strategy, the special team led by Olivia was still nowhere to be found, presumably still looking for a shortcut or a snack. The story resumes on the early morning of the fourth day. The third day of the battle had ended in an impasse, with only small skirmishes between the two armies, particularly on the Imperial army's right wing, where Mintis had done nothing but defend himself. General George laughed maniacally, declaring that the weather was finally working to their favor. A subordinate agreed, stating they were ready to charge in at any time. George rallied the pride of their nation, the armored cavalry squad, screaming orders for them to kill them all and leave no one alive. He commanded them to charge right to the enemy's center and head straight for the enemy's head. The soldiers cheered "yeah" in response, fully prepared for the assault. On the Kingdom Army's center, Lambert and Neinhardt stood in the rain. Lambert stated he knew the enemy was not planning on letting this chance slip away. Neinhardt asked if they were going to thin out the middle of the formation to lure the enemy in. Lambert confirmed that was right. He explained they would take the charge with a V formation. Neinhardt noted that the enemy was planning to force their way through to the center and go straight for the main army. He thought there was a good possibility based on the move they made on the first day. George, mounted on his horse, surmised that if that was true, he bet their head was a stubborn muscle brain. Lambert smiled and said there was no mistaking that he would take this bait. He admitted that after all, if it was him, he would do exactly the same, even if it was obviously a trap. Neinhardt internally realized Lambert was basically saying he was a feral beast too. He asked if Lambert was pretty confident. Lambert said but of course and mentioned he had one suggestion for this strategy. Neinhardt then remarked that he felt pathetic for thinking that, but was glad they were on the same side. He added that although Lambert looked handsome on the surface, he was quite the saddest. Lambert sweated profusely at the comment. Lambert then called Neinhardt really cheeky too, as expected of the vice commander of the first squad. Neinhardt said he felt extremely happy to hear his compliment. He said he was really thankful for all his kind words and asked Lambert to please leave the rest of the preparations to him. At the same time, in a different place, specifically hiding behind the bushes on the Imperial army's flank, Olivia and Claudia were watching the battle from afar with their telescopes. The hero always comes late. The rain poured down on the battlefield, marking that a few days had passed since the battle started. Claudia watched the scene, feeling the weight of their delay, but she steeled herself, deciding it was no time to mope around. Beside her, Olivia peered through a telescope, sweating profusely and wondering how she should beg for forgiveness for their failure to arrive on time. Claudia reassured her that it could not be helped and it was not her fault that the river was flooded and they could not cross. Through the lens, they saw that the kingdom army was getting pushed back. Olivia, strangely enough, seemed to admire how well trained the enemy looked, prompting Claudia to snap her out of it, reminding her that this was not the time for admiration. Claudia declared they had no time to lose and needed to ambush the main enemy army immediately. She noted that as far as she could tell from there, the main clash was happening in the center against the Imperial armored cavalry. Suddenly, Olivia turned and grabbed Claudia's face, laughing that her vice commander's face was all muddy. Claudia, shocked and covered in mud, blamed Olivia for it. Olivia told her to calm down, explaining that it was too soon to make a move, and they should watch the situation a bit longer. Claudia protested that their army was getting pushed back, but Olivia insisted she take another look at the center through the telescope. Claudia observed that their army had formed a V formation to receive the charging Imperial armored cavalry. Olivia pointed out the strangeness of it. Normally, one would thicken the center so that the charging cavalry would not be able to break through, but their army had spread the center thin. Claudia realized that normally the enemy armored cavalry should have the upper hand. The narration explained that the V formation was spread thin in the middle, aiming to surround the enemy. Claudia worried that if the enemy broke through the middle first before the sides could complete the encirclement, it would be the end for them. Olivia, however, smiled confidently, believing that they were doing that to set a trap for the Imperial soldiers, which meant they must have some kind of plan. Olivia reasoned that if the trap went well, it would at least shake the enemy soldiers, noting that it seemed to be the main fighting power of the Imperial army there. Claudia was confused about what kind of trap it could be, admitting she had no idea. Olivia stretched her arms and suggested they stop there for now. Claudia realized that if they could trick the enemy and ambush them, it was more likely to shake the Imperial army, noting that it was indeed hitting two birds with one stone. Claudia realized that her view had been getting narrower and narrower before she even realized it. She admitted that since they were given a very crucial job, she was too focused on what was going on in front of her and failed to see the bigger picture. Olivia was seen stretching nearby, looking relaxed. Claudia called out to Olivia, instructing her to leave some men on the vantage point so they could check immediately if the trap went well. To psych herself up for the stress of command, Claudia proceeded to smack her own cheeks repeatedly, making a loud slapping sound that probably hurt more than the enemy would. Claudia saluted and declared that she would leave it to her, while a small soldier in the background looked on in confusion, wondering what kind of leadership technique this was. Olivia told Claudia she would leave the rest to her, although she didn't understand why Claudia smacked her own cheeks. Olivia added that since they could use the chance when the enemy was shaken to set up another ambush, it was the right move. Claudia agreed. The scene shifted to the rain-swept battlefield where the Imperial armored cavalry was charging forward. General George led the charge with a fierce expression, looking like he hadn't had his coffee yet. His subordinate yelled at him to slow down, pointing out that the enemy's movements were rather suspicious. George ignored the warning and yelled at him to make it quick. Suddenly, a soldier was struck down. George's subordinate believed that they must be setting some kind of trap. He noted that the difference was as clear as day compared to the first day of the battle. For some reason, the enemy wasn't resisting much. George dismissed the concern with a hump, asking so what. He declared that if it was a trap, they would crush it. The subordinate was shocked, asking if he was saying that the proud Imperial armored cavalry could be defeated by a mere trap set by the kingdom army. George simply stated that was all there is to it, displaying the confidence of a man who clearly hadn't read the genre of the story he was in. George then told his subordinate to shut that mouth unless he gave permission. He told him to just think of taking down the enemy's main battalion. George rode off, saying he didn't have time to listen to foolish talk. He saw the enemy taking their bait as planned, calling it his greatest achievement right in front of his eyes. He charged towards a line of hay on the ground, completely unaware that he was riding straight into a barbecue. The commander confirmed that all their men had been withdrawn from the enemy's path. Satisfied that there would be no problem, he gave the order to do it. An archer holding a flaming arrow prepared and fired. The arrow flew through the rainy sky. The commander ordered to start the fire. The arrow struck a pile of hay soaked in oil that had been placed at a point they expected the enemy to pass through. General George looked on in shock as the fire ignited. The armored cavalrymen who didn't see it coming were engulfed in flames in an instant. The center of the battlefield became a sight of hell, and the smell of smoked meat enveloped the area, which was a bit too literal for a barbecue. On the other hand, on Olivia and Claudia's side, the mood was much lighter. Olivia cheered that the bread was delicious. A soldier reported in while Ashton warned someone in the background to watch their timing when pulling the bread away, or it would get eaten right away. Olivia happily munched on the bread, declaring that Ashton's bread was really delicious and the special mustard was just the best. Suddenly, Claudia spotted fire blazing in the center of the battlefield. Olivia calmly noted that it seemed to be a trap set by their side. Claudia realized it really turned out just as she had guessed. She ordered everyone to be told that they were heading out. A soldier saluted and agreed to do so right away. Claudia wondered what a daring strategy it was, questioning who exactly thought of using fire in the middle of the rain. Olivia stretched her arms cheerfully, betting that the enemy was focused on the central area. She concluded that thanks to that distraction, it would be easier for them to set up an ambush. The rain poured down heavily as Olivia watched the distant fires of the battlefield. A soldier called out to Lieutenant Olivia in surprise as she suddenly ran out into the downpour. She remarked that the rain was pretty heavy and decided that in that case, she would proceed. She mused that no matter how bloody the situation became, the rain would wash it all clean, a comforting thought for someone about to commit mass murder. Her soldiers looked on in terror, wondering why they were so scared of a little precipitation. Claudia yelled at her not to leave her behind like that, struggling to keep up with the monster girl's pace. Olivia and Claudia rode their horses forward, coming face to face with the Imperial Army's flank guard. Claudia nervously pointed out that the enemy had spotted them. Olivia cheerfully agreed that it seemed to be the case. She gripped her sword tightly, noting that although they had been spotted, it was already too late for the Imperials to do anything about it. With a bright smile, Olivia charged forward on her horse. She swung her black sword with terrifying grace, slicing through an enemy soldier and sending blood flying into the rainy air. She continued her rampage, cutting down more soldiers while sitting calmly on her horse, looking like a gardener pruning very bloody hedges. Her sword dripped with the evidence of her work as she rode through the chaos. This marked the first time Claudia was witnessing Lieutenant Olivia fight in person. She was finally seeing for herself how Lieutenant Olivia fought while soldiers around her cheered for their commander. Even after reading the reports about Olivia's fighting prowess, Claudia had thought nothing would surprise her. But now that she saw it for herself, the sheer power was just overwhelming. Olivia laughed cheerfully as she charged ahead alone, prompting Claudia to yell at her for rushing into danger out of the blue, to which Olivia simply apologized with a laugh. Claudia realized she needed to stop gawking and focus on the fight, noting that there were simply too many openings in the enemy lines for Olivia to ignore. Suddenly, a soldier shouted that another squad of enemies was approaching their commander. Claudia's expression turned serious as she assessed the new threat. She ordered the 3rd and 4th battalions to follow her, instructing Olivia to head straight for the enemy's main battalion as fast as she could while she held off the incoming threat. When Olivia asked if she was sure, Claudia confidently told her to leave it to her and that they would meet up later at the main battalion. With that, Olivia rode off into the woods, leaving Claudia to handle the cleanup. The Battle of Iris Plain was finally reaching its climax. Olivia, not wanting to lose to Claudia, decided they should head to the enemy's main battalion. But before that, she spotted a group of enemies nearby. With a bright smile, she suggested they make quick work of them first, charging straight into the fray with her sword ready to swing. The story continues with Olivia riding through the battlefield, effortlessly cutting down soldiers who recognize her as the monster girl from the Canary Highway incident. Rearguard Commanding Officer Major Brandt tries to rally his troops, shouting that they shouldn't be frightened by a single girl. But he charges at her and is instantly cut down. The soldiers scream that she really is a monster as they flee. Olivia orders her troops to kill them all, and she looks over the carnage, remarking to Zed that human beings are truly cruel and warmongering creatures. At the Kingdom Army main force, Otto and Lambert discuss the plan. They note that the special brigade led by Lieutenant Olivia is a bit late. They worry that if enemy reinforcements are dispatched from Fortress Kiel, it will be over for them. But they decide to wait a bit longer for the signal fire. Otto knows Lambert is thinking about attacking now since the special brigade cannot help, but Lambert agrees that right now is an opportune time to attack, though he notes the enemy general is not a fool. Otto suggests the enemy may begin retreating back to Fort Casper after finding themselves at a disadvantage. Lambert implies that would be the perfect time to crush them. Otto mentions he said they were running late but trusts Lieutenant Olivia, and Lambert agrees that believing in subordinates is a duty of a commanding officer. At the Imperial Army main encampment, Lieutenant General George realizes he probably charged despite knowing it was a trap because he is brash. A subordinate suggests the Lieutenant General thought the kingdom troops wouldn't pose a problem. Suddenly, reports come in that enemy forces have appeared behind them. Paris is ordered to ascertain the situation immediately. Reports confirm the rear guard commanding officer met a cruel end, and that a single girl called a monster is likely the one who butchered Samuel. George realizes this battlefield is the stage for the confirmation of her existence. Paris tries to reassure George, saying not to worry about the monster, but suddenly a sword pierces through a soldier next to George. Soldiers scream about the monster. Olivia appears covered in blood and introduces herself as Olivia. She asks which human is the commander. Soldiers try to hide, but Olivia says hide and seek won't work and spins to cut down the surrounding soldiers. She looks at the remaining officers and says they don't look like the right ones, comparing them to Grandpa Paul, and decides they don't seem very important. Paris realizes he won't be able to buy the general much time and tells General Oswan to retreat immediately. Paris charges at Olivia but is quickly defeated, rolling on the ground and apologizing. Oswan looks at his fallen strategist and says he doesn't think he will be able to fulfill his last request. Oswan then introduces himself as the commander of the Imperial Southern Army, Oswan von Glarwen. He charges at Olivia and they clash swords. Oswan is shocked that she is really human, and Olivia laughs, saying of course she is human. Oswan asks if they can end it now. Olivia asks if he will sheath his sword if she refuses. She realizes she was mistaken about her word usage, and that human language is complicated, noting she never considered a situation where someone refuses. She grips her sword and says, okay, how about this? She will be ending him now. She swings, and Oswan braces himself, shouting, here I come. They clash again, and Olivia gets behind him. She tells Sir Oswan that he is pretty strong, but just a little too slow. The sequence begins with a blur of motion as Olivia delivers a fatal strike. The enemy general's head separates from his body, flying through the air before he lets out a final ah. Claudia rushes over to Lieutenant Olivia, asking if she is injured. In a separate thought, the pitch, black fog shrouding the sword, and the shadow floating behind Prime Minister d'Armes are noted to be very similar. Claudia checks herself and declares she is all fine, admitting she sustained some wounds but insisting it won't be an issue. Olivia pats her subordinate, reminding her that they only have one life so they should be careful. Claudia asks if Olivia killed the enemy general. Olivia points to a severed head lying on the ground, identifying the man as Oswan von Glarwein. Seeing a smoke signal in the distance, Olivia asks if it is okay that they did not light the signal fire. Claudia is shocked that Olivia actually defeated him. Olivia casually remarks that defeating him was her job after all. Claudia realizes that with this, the main forces will now commence an all-out assault. When Olivia asks what they shall do now, Claudia suggests they could completely crush enemy morale by spreading news of their general's death. Olivia suggests attaching his head to the tip of a spear, reasoning that showing it directly would be the easiest way. Claudia is horrified, asking if Olivia would really go that far. Olivia replies that if Claudia does not want to, she does not care either way. Terrified, Claudia salutes and promises to have it prepared immediately. Olivia lets out a big yawn, noting that the battle has finally reached its turning point. The kingdom must also take Fort Casper. Olivia stretches her arms and sings cheerfully that the toils of a soldier never ends, while Claudia facepalms in the background, realizing her commander is completely unfazed by the carnage. Otto raised his arm high and dramatically declared that the silver spear has been unleashed, which was just a fancy way of saying the smoke signal was up. General Cornelius, seeing the signal, announced that they will now commence an all-out assault, ordering his troops to show no mercy to those who stand in their way. On the Imperial side, General George surveyed the devastation. A soldier reported that traces of battle indicated the main encampment was destroyed by a surprise attack from the enemy. George grabbed Vice Commander Silas by the collar, stating that if he were to entertain jokes at a time like this, he wouldn't be able to call himself a soldier, which was rich considering the situation. Silas reported that their left flank is currently holding, but even that is a question of how long, and furthermore, their right flank is in the midst of breaking. He added that they need to begin preparations to withdraw immediately. George gulped, realizing that just by standing there, they let the enemy press ever closer, and they can't afford to waste any more time. George pointed and declared that the main encampment has been destroyed, and they must withdraw immediately. He shouted that their path of retreat will be blocked at this rate. He yelled that as long as Fort Casper is held, they can recover from this situation, but by dying here, they lose any chance to regroup and re-engage. A soldier asked if General Oswan is safe. George remained silent for a moment before a soldier noted that a portion of the enemy seemed to be celebrating the death of the general. Another soldier reported that the kingdom's 7th Army is pushing forward relentlessly, though he admitted he cannot attest to the validity of the claim about the general. George simply said he sees, accepting the grim reality. Looking at the carnage, a soldier estimated that 30% of their forces are probably already gone. Another soldier asked how many of their armored cavalry remain alive, noting that whether or not half the remaining soldiers can even fight at full combat effectiveness is another issue. George looked at the mess and remarked that this is what happens when you look down on your foe. He said he understands. George ordered that once preparations are complete, they will withdraw to Fort Casper. He commanded to move the injured to the rear and deploy the defensive units. A soldier responded yes sir at once, ready to flee. At the Imperial Army's right flank encampment, Commander Mintus screams in a panic, demanding to know how long his troops are going to dawdle around and ordering an immediate retreat back to Fort Casper. His shouting is met with absolute silence from the soldiers, who simply stare at him with dead, unimpressed eyes. Later historical accounts would politely state that Commander Mintus fell in a hail of arrows at the hands of the Kingdom Army during the Battle of Iris Plain. But the reality is that his own men are just done with his nonsense. One soldier internally tells someone to shut up, while another realizes they aren't preparing to withdraw because of his order. They are doing it simply because they don't want to die. The thought of dying together with an idiot commander is too much to bear, and joking about it isn't even an option. A soldier asks where His Excellency's horse is, pointing out that they are not His Excellency Mintus's personal guard. Another soldier angrily asks if Mintus dares suggest His Excellency withdraw on his own 2 feet. When Mintus yells, "You dare?" a soldier sarcastically suggests that if a horse is needed, perhaps Mintus should search for it himself. The soldier notes that what was just said could be considered treason, but he will overlook it, demanding they get going and bring His Excellency's horse now. Another soldier steps forward, saying if they wish to charge him for treason, please go ahead and do so. Chaos erupts as soldiers start fighting each other. One soldier yells, "Here!" and "Go ahead and try me!" while another yells, "Usava," before getting hit with a ja. A soldier yells, "Ga," as he is kicked. Mintus, losing his mind, holds a sword to a soldier's neck, screaming that he will have him beheaded at once and asking how dare he. The soldier calmly asks what uncouth acts are being committed against his aides, noting that the same could be said for His Excellency as well. Suddenly, archers turn their bows toward Mintus. Minty screams in terror, asking what insanity has bewitched them, and how lowly soldiers like them dare raise weapons at one of Imperial blood, though a caption notes he is a distant relative. A soldier states there is nothing to be said. He declares that their beloved Major Rayons was killed because of Mintus's stupidity. He points out that Rayons even sacrificed himself to let Mintus escape, which is exactly what Mintus should have done, admitting he almost died because of Mintus's plan. Commander Mintus screamed in terror as an arrow pierced straight through his forehead. A soldier, having completely lost patience with the incompetent commander, declared that since Mintus could not understand something as simple as the fact that his death was expected, he would die right there. Another soldier shouted for him to stop spewing nonsense. Mintus collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud, joining his aides in death as the soldiers stood over the bodies, having decided their fate with extreme prejudice. The scene was chaotic as arrows rained down on the mutineers' targets. A soldier with long dark hair stammered in shock, asking what was happening, before screaming the order to fire to cover their tracks. A volley of arrows was released to ensure the job was finished. Afterward, a soldier stood over the corpses of Mintus and his aides. He calmly reported that regrettably, His Excellency Mintus and his aides were caught in a hail of arrows from the kingdom soldiers and killed in the line of duty, a convenient lie to cover up the mutiny. He ordered an immediate withdrawal to Fort Casper to report the situation, and his subordinate enthusiastically agreed to flee. Elsewhere on the battlefield, the Imperial armored cavalry was retreating amidst fierce fighting. To leave the Iris Plains, they had engaged in over 20 skirmishes, reducing their numbers to just 2,000 men. General George and Vice Commander Silas rode through rock formations. Silas suggested that once they passed these rocks, they would finally reach a plateau and should take a quick breather. George, looking utterly exhausted, hoped for a rest, but the battle was not yet over. A soldier pointed ahead and unfortunately informed his superior that a breather would not be possible. In front of an astonishing scene, the world of the retreating Imperials collapsed around them. Lieutenant Olivia rode forward on her horse. Behind her, a soldier held a spear high, displaying the severed head of General Oswan. General George stared in horror, muttering about what a tenacious bunch they were. His soldiers shouted in alarm, pointing at the approaching enemy. George's eyes went wide with terror as he realized who was chasing them. George, desperate and furious, realized that these were the ones who defeated the main force. He asked if they should eliminate them. Silas, however, looked resigned. He drew his sword. George asked since when the vice commander began spouting such absurdity, noting it was quite unlike him. Silas replied that, moreover, the lieutenant general's bad habits had rubbed off on him, implying he was done following foolish orders or perhaps ready to join the recklessness. Silas, fueled by rage and loyalty, declared that his blood was boiling at the mere thought of leaving General Oswan in his current headless state. He rallied his remaining soldiers, shouting that they were his soldiers, and charged back into the fray. George watched this display of suicidal bravery and thought to himself that he was surrounded by idiots, but then realized that was precisely why he respected them, or perhaps just why he was doomed. George reflected that normally he would ridicule the Kingdom Army for fielding a girl into battle. However, his instincts were screaming at him that this was no ordinary girl. He formulated a plan to first eliminate her horse to reduce her mobility, realizing that this girl was truly dangerous. George charged at Olivia, swinging his sword with the intent to kill her horse. Olivia effortlessly blocked the attack. She smiled innocently and remarked that it was not nice to kill a horse. George, shocked by her strength and audacity, asked if she was the one who killed General Oswan. Olivia cheerfully confirmed that yes, that was her and she destroyed him. George realized his instincts were right. He gripped his sword tightly, vowing to remember the name Olivia, and screamed for her to cross over to the underworld as he launched a fierce attack. They clashed swords repeatedly. George asked if they could end it now, impatient for a kill. Olivia simply replied with a casual, "Oh, hoops," perhaps feigning a stumble or just being her usual confusing self. George laughed maniacally, remarking on what a sight it was to behold as she danced around his attacks so easily. Olivia, however, was done playing. She declared that she would be ending him now. George screamed that like hell she would end him and launched a desperate attack, swinging his sword with all his might. He looked absolutely shocked, shouting that this was impossible as Olivia moved faster than he could track. Olivia's eye focused intensely. She leaped high into the air, her sword poised for a downward strike, looking like a dark angel of death descending from the stormy sky. George looked up in sheer terror, realizing he was about to become a kebab. Silas screamed for his sir in horror. Olivia plunged her black sword straight down, piercing through George's helmet and skull with brutal efficiency. Silas, witnessing his general's instant death, screamed that she was a heathen and charged at her in a fit of rage. Olivia casually pulled her sword out of George's head, blood splattering everywhere. With a swift swing, Olivia cut down Silas and his horse in one motion. Silas tumbled off his mount as George's armored body finally collapsed to the ground. Within the next hour, the famous Imperial Armored Cavalry Division was completely annihilated, leaving nothing but corpses behind. After the slaughter, Olivia looked at her sword and noticed the rain had already stopped, expressing her disappointment because she probably wanted the rain to wash away the blood again. The battle concluded on the fourth day. The Imperial Army's main forces were wiped out by the surprise attack. General Oswan was dead, killed by Lieutenant Olivia, and the Battle of Iris Plain was over, with the kingdom's flags waving in the clearing sky. Claudia beamed with excitement, declaring that she never imagined they would be assigned as the vanguard for the assault on Fort Casper, calling it a prestigious honor. Olivia, lounging on the ground, simply didn't get it. She stated that instead of honor and prestige, she would much rather be given books or delicious food, priorities that clearly differed from her subordinates. Ashton, busy cutting bread, wondered aloud why he had recently been assigned as the person in charge of Olivia's meals. Olivia dismissed his confusion, explaining that the special mustard he made was so yummy that she just couldn't help asking for more. Ashton rationalized the extra work by telling himself that making meals for one person versus two wasn't much different time-wise, so it was fine. As Olivia cheered and reached for the food, she thought to herself that he was incredibly easy to read. Ashton tried to act cool with a hemph, but he was clearly pleased. Claudia chimed in, agreeing that the mustard was splendid enough that she wished to know the recipe, and asked Ashton to make some for her too. Olivia excitedly noted that Claudia agreed. Ashton asked if they had enjoyed the provisions lately, and Claudia confirmed they were delicious. Ashton then asked if Claudia was a knight. When she asked why that mattered, Claudia explained that knights are able to eat even more delicious food to their heart's content, having more opportunities than commoners. Ashton, holding the mustard jar, proudly declared that the mustard he uses does not lose to that fancy food at all. He paused, confused by his own confidence, but then completely fell for the flattery. He happily began preparing more food, humming a tune and telling them to wait just a little bit longer. Olivia watched him work and remarked once again that this young man really is easy to read. While the food situation was being sorted, Claudia ran the numbers. The Special Brigade's remaining forces numbered 200. She explained that if the enemy forces in Fort Casper numbered 5,000, standard military tactics dictated that capturing a fort required at least 3 times the occupying force. Therefore, attacking would essentially be impossible. She asked Lieutenant Olivia if she had any thoughts on the assault. However, the dramatic reveal came that assaulting and taking the fort was not their mission this time, rendering Claudia's tactical panic somewhat premature. Olivia was busy chewing on her food when Ashton gently reminded her to swallow first before trying to speak. Once she had gulped down her meal, she admitted that she hadn't really thought about the mission much yet, figuring she would come up with a plan after actually seeing the enemy. Claudia, ever the serious vice commander, explained their assigned role as the vanguard. They were to assault the fort relentlessly to exhaust and weaken the enemy defenses until the main forces arrived. She asked Olivia if she had come up with any ideas. Olivia, with a bright and cheerful expression that belied the darkness of her suggestion, proposed that she simply take the fort by herself. Claudia was taken aback, finding the idea incredibly gloomy and realizing with a sweat drop that Olivia was absolutely not joking. Internally, Claudia reasoned that taking a fort alone would be impossible, even for someone as powerful as Olivia. She listed the practical obstacles. They lacked siege engines. Breaking through the fortified front gate would be difficult, and the enemy certainly wouldn't just sit idle while they attacked. Olivia, however, insisted there had to be a way, even without siege equipment. Suddenly, she turned her attention to Ashton, dragging the poor guy into the strategic discussion by asking if he had any ideas on how they could capture Fort Casper by themselves. Ashton was startled to be included, while Claudia thought that a mere soldier shouldn't be part of such a high-level conversation. Ashton, however, began to think. He recalled that Fort Casper was built during the early days of the Warring Kingdoms era, meaning it was quite old. Based on this knowledge, he tentatively suggested that he thought a certain strategy would somewhat work. Claudia was shocked by his sudden confidence. Olivia beamed at Claudia, proudly announcing that Ashton was aiming to become a strategist, leaving Claudia stunned and Ashton looking rather nervous about the sudden promotion of his career goals. At Fort Casper, Colonel Broom, the head of defense for the Imperial Army, stared grimly at the reports. He demanded to know if there were any errors, insisting there was no margin for error. A subordinate confirmed that multiple scouts had verified the advance of the Kingdom Army. Broom apologized for his outburst but noted the reports were in disarray. He asked about the main force, and a soldier reported that around 2,000 enemy forces had been spotted. Broom was confused, asking what about the main force. Broom slammed his fist on the desk, yelling at an imbecile to hurry and get confirmation. A bell rang as Major Lanchester, Broom's aide, entered the room. Broom ordered him to inform the troops about the enemy advance and prepare for a counterattack. Lanchester questioned if the Southern Army was really defeated in a mere week, noting they still didn't know the details. Broom found it hard to believe but acknowledged that with General Oswan in charge, it shouldn't be the case. A soldier rushed in to report that there were no signs of the main Kingdom Army following the advance force. Broom wondered what was going on. He questioned if the kingdom really thought Fort Casper could be captured with a mere 2,000 soldiers, or if the main Kingdom Army had been defeated and these were just remnants resolved to fight to the last man. Deciding there was no use in overthinking it due to lacking intel, he stopped his spiraling thoughts. 2 hours later, the Imperial Army's Fort Casper defensive force stood ready on the walls as the Kingdom Army's Special Brigade led by Olivia met them on the battlefield. The battle commences with long-range attacks by the Special Brigade's longbow unit, as archers draw their bows and release a volley of arrows. However, the defenders on the castle walls are merely confused, wondering what the attackers are doing since the arrows fall pathetically short of the target. The arrows land harmlessly in the dirt far away from the fort, looking more like a warning shot for a picnic than a siege. The Imperial soldiers on the walls burst into laughter, mocking the attackers as a rabble of amateurs who clearly have no idea how to wage war. They joke about how scared the enemy must be to shoot from such a ridiculous distance, wondering if they even know the range of their own bows. A commander yells at his men to stop standing around and orders them to hurry and return fire with the ballistas, confident that their weapons can easily cover the distance. Meanwhile, Claudia, riding a horse, orders all forces to retreat, instructing them to block any potential counter, attack arrows with shields, and withdraw out of range immediately. This cycle of shooting, missing, and retreating repeats itself in a rinse and repeat fashion, with the kingdom army laughing as they run away, followed by a short break. Claudia, sweating nervously, asks Ashton if this strategy will really work. Ashton admits that while he knows this prevents any casualties to their forces, he is worried that the enemy is surely ridiculing them right now. Ashton argues that if they win in the end, they will have the last laugh, so as long as that happens, the style of fighting doesn't matter, even if it feels a bit unknightly to him. Claudia yells at him in frustration, asking how he could even think of such a strategy. According to Ashton, forts built during the Warring Kingdoms era will definitely contain a secret escape tunnel. The plan is to split their forces into two groups. One group, presumably led by the terrifying Olivia, is there to draw the attention of the enemy forces. The other group is to take advantage of that opportunity to sneak in and unlatch the front gate. Furthermore, the tunnel exit will generally lead to an old well nearby. Their current show of force is nothing more than a facade to deceive the eyes of the enemy. As long as the main gate is open, the special brigade can easily invade Fort Casper, using this well as an entrance, turning a pathetic archery display into a clever Trojan horse strategy, except with a well instead of a horse. Ashton reflected that while he had called it a strategy, it could hardly be called one. He admitted that he had simply asked Olivia to do the impossible because he had seen firsthand just how strong she truly was. Meanwhile, Olivia waved cheerfully to her troops, announcing that she would be back in a bit before heading off to do whatever impossible thing she had been tasked with. Claudia explained the logic behind the secret tunnel plan. Since the Imperial forces had taken Fort Casper from the kingdom, even the original occupants like herself hadn't known of the tunnel's existence in their wildest dreams. She reasoned that the enemy wouldn't have imagined it either. She noted that this plan wouldn't work in the first place if one didn't know the layout of the fort, revealing that she had read every book on military history and warfare she could lay her hands on. Ashton listened and replied that he would be glad if he could increase the survival rate of those around him, even if just by a little. Ashton looked at Claudia with a serious expression and admitted that he, too, did not wish to die yet. The narration noted that war reaps the souls of soldiers relentlessly, and the fellow soldier standing next to you today may not be by your side tomorrow. Ashton understood this grim reality, which was why he was absorbing as much knowledge as possible even now, so he could work towards reducing sacrifices. He persevered even in the face of death, even if he wished to flee. Claudia looked at him and realized they couldn't die that easily after coming this far. She agreed with him. She then shouted an order for all forces to retreat. The narration concluded that by eluding the god of death, the survivors are the victors. Meanwhile, as the special brigade poured all their effort into distracting the defending Imperial forces, a different group was navigating a dark, cobweb-filled tunnel. The air felt stale down there, leading one soldier to remark that it really looked like no one had used this tunnel in a long time. Another soldier pointed out yet another spider web, proving the place was truly abandoned. A brown rat squeaked and scurried away from their torchlight, likely fleeing the impending violence. Sergeant Gauss, leading the Fort Casper invasion party, admitted to Lieutenant Olivia that he honestly didn't think they would be able to enter Fort Casper this smoothly. Olivia simply agreed with a cheerful yep, confident in their sneakiness. They finally reached the tunnel exit, which turned out to be an old well. Olivia was delighted, noting that Ashton had guessed the general area of the tunnel location for them. She promptly squashed a rat that got in the way, proving her efficiency against rodents was just as high as her efficiency against soldiers. She credited the success entirely to Ashton's book smarts. When Gauss asked how they would be splitting their forces, Olivia reminded him that they had already decided to divide their forces equally into two. She then cheerfully announced that she would be going in by herself to distract the enemy. Everyone else would go to open the gate, letting Claudia and the others in. Gauss was horrified that she planned to do this by herself, realizing she was essentially a one-woman army. Olivia explained her logic when she was alone. She could swing her sword around to her heart's content without worrying about hitting allies. Gauss, clearly worried about her safety, and perhaps the safety of the enemy, suggested she take at least 10 people or so. Olivia just laughed and patted his shoulder, telling him he didn't need to worry about her. Gauss looked absolutely gloomy about the situation, muttering that he didn't think she would hit them, but nothing was for certain, right? Implying that friendly fire was a genuine concern with Olivia's wild swinging. Olivia gave the final orders. Gauss and the rest were to stay there for about 30 minutes, and then start the operation. Gauss understood. As she walked away, Gauss called out for her to be careful. Olivia thanked him and said she would. She walked deeper into the tunnel until she saw a light ahead signaling her arrival inside the fort. Olivia emerged into a storage room inside the fort. She was amazed, exclaiming that the place was just like how it was described in the books she had read. She pushed open a door with a loud bang, subtlety clearly not her strong suit. She looked around the dusty room. Suddenly, she spotted a soldier walking away down the hallway. She began to tiptoe happily, ready to cause some chaos. A confused Imperial soldier demanded to know where the commanding officer was. Olivia appeared before him and calmly asked who the human in charge was right now. The soldier, baffled by her presence, asked what she was saying. Olivia bluntly informed him that Mr. Oswan was already dead. The soldier recoiled in shock, calling her words ridiculous. He insisted that General Oswan was obviously in the midst of fighting the kingdom forces at the Iris Plains. Suspicious, the soldier demanded to know which squad she was from, realizing too late that something was terribly wrong. Olivia cheerfully revealed she was from the Special Brigade. The soldier screamed in horror, realizing she was from the kingdom. Olivia shushed him with a finger to his lips. She then promptly stabbed him through the chest. Another soldier nearby heard the commotion and yelled to know who was making all that noise. Olivia held the dying soldier upright, casually telling him it was not time to be noisy yet. More soldiers rushed in, discovering the scene. Olivia lamented that she had planned to start by killing the commanding officers first, but things rarely went according to plan. She stood over the body, remarking that this was how it ended up anyway. She turned to face the new group of terrified soldiers, her black sword ready. 30 minutes later, Sergeant Gauss and his team stood at the entrance of the tunnel, looking absolutely horrified. The tunnel was a slaughterhouse, filled with bodies and blood splattered everywhere. Gauss noted with a sweat that their body parts were all scattered around. A dying soldier groaned in pain nearby, barely clinging to life. Despite the gore, Gauss found himself thinking that he was very glad Lieutenant Olivia was on their side. He heard cries echoing from deeper within the fort. He realized those cries were unmistakably the sound of the lieutenant fighting. Steeling himself, he ordered his men to head to the front gate now. In the Fort Casper strategy room, Major Padoin screamed in frustration, demanding to know how long it would take to deal with a single intruder. A soldier rushed in, breathless, correcting him that it wasn't just a single intruder but a monster wielding a black sword, adding that Confronting Broom must have heard the rumors too. Padoin scoffed at the idea of a monster, calling it ridiculous nonsense. He confidently suggested that as long as they trapped it in an enclosed area, they could just shoot it from a distance to end it. The soldier, sweating profusely, admitted he had already tried that exact tactic. He recounted how the moment the archers fired their arrows, the monster appeared right in front of them, and the heads of 3 soldiers were sent spinning into the air before anyone could blink. Padoin, losing his mind, slammed his foot down and screamed that if that wasn't a monster, he didn't know what was. The soldier, having had enough, stated he had reported on the situation and requested to be relieved of any further duties. Padoin called him an ingrate for abandoning his post in the midst of battle. The soldier, seemingly accepting his fate, laughed and asked if he was going to be executed for desertion, adding that whether the colonel believed the story or not was up to him, though he might as well be living in a fairy tale for believing it. Confronting Broom, looking grim, told the soldier to go ahead and leave. He turned to his aide, Lanchester, and quietly stated they would deal with the deserter later. Lanchester asked for the colonel's thoughts on the report. Broom admitted that, while it was hard to judge, he believed what Major Padoin said was based on facts, and it would likely be wise to take action. He somberly added that he didn't think he would be able to leave the fort alive anyway. Lanchester, shocked, asked if he was being serious. Lanchester explained that there were existences in this world that humans simply could not fight against, akin to a natural disaster. Broom's eyes went wide as he shouted, asking if he was saying they were facing a sorcerer. Lanchester confirmed that was about right and asked the colonel to wait a moment as he walked out of the room. Left alone, a sweating Broom wondered what the best course of action would be if that truly was the case. Confronting Broom examined the weapon placed before him, a test sample sent by the engineering division. He identified it as a handheld ballista, noting that its speed and damage capabilities far surpassed anything a standard archer could achieve. He grimly suggested they use this superior firepower to kill the monster before the situation in the fort deteriorated any further. Suddenly, a soldier burst into the strategy room, screaming that the kingdom army had broken through the front gate and was surging into the fort. Broom, prioritizing etiquette over the impending doom, yelled at the man for daring to enter without knocking. The soldier frantically apologized and delivered his emergency report, explaining that the enemy hadn't used siege engines. Instead, enemy soldiers had suddenly appeared inside the walls to unlatch the gate for the sieging forces. Broom realized with horror that the monstrous girl was simply a diversion. Their true aim had been to open the gates all along. Desperate to maintain control, Broom insisted the battle was not yet lost, arguing that based on numbers alone, they could still overwhelm the enemy. Lanchester, however, looked utterly terrified and resigned to his fate, declaring that he would also take command and join the fray. Broom stared at his aide, the name Lanchester escaping his lips in shock as he realized how dire things truly were. The narration noted that soldier morale, the most important factor in war, had essentially fallen to nothing. With a frightening monster lurking inside and the front gate fallen, the moment they could have used their advantage in numbers had already passed. Outside, Claudia rode forward on her horse, shouting orders for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd battalions to move forward and take all strategic points at once. Jairu, a soldier with more enthusiasm than sense, declared to everyone that as the self-appointed captain of Lieutenant Olivia's personal guard, this was his time to shine. He shouted at the troops not to dare do anything to disgrace the name of their war maiden, rallying them with a loud hey. Claudia watched the display, thinking that while naming himself captain was inexcusable, it was surprisingly boosting their troop morale. Ashton stood beside her, apologizing for having to witness such a spectacle. Claudia wondered when exactly that man had decided he was the captain of the personal guard, but the troops seemed to buy into his energy. An hour later, the result of that energy combined with sheer terror was evident. Enemy soldiers were begging for mercy, promising to surrender quietly and not even think of resisting, pleading to be taken as prisoners. Claudia remarked that appeared Ashton's strategy had succeeded spectacularly. Ashton, looking embarrassed, replied that they couldn't really say it that way. Claudia observed that judging by the state of the captive enemy soldiers, the surrender was actually a result of something Olivia did. Ashton agreed that was certainly true. Claudia and Ashton stood before the fort walls, realizing that Lieutenant Olivia must have done something extraordinary. The narration explained that this something was the complete annihilation of morale in the numerically superior enemy. Inside, Olivia was seen holding a severed head by the hair, asking the terrified defenders if they were the ones calling her the rumored monster. Standing on a ledge, covered in blood, Olivia denied that she was a monster and declared that her name was Olivia. The narration ironically noted that assaulting a fort single-handedly was exactly the kind of thing people called a monster. In the foreground, a handheld ballista lay ready, a testament to the desperate measures the defenders had considered against the girl who refused to die. Olivia stood before Colonel Broom, casually holding a severed head by the hair. She cheerfully asked if he was the commanding officer, Colonel Broom, noting that the head in her hand had been kind enough to give up his location before expiring. With a casual toss, she threw the gruesome projectile directly at him. Broom recoiled as the head flew past. He realized he was spewing the same words as Padoin now. He thought that for those who don't look to the future, there was no use crying over spilt milk. He couldn't help but call her a monster for single-handedly throwing a fort into chaos. He remembered when he himself had dismissed Padoin's claims so easily. Now, faced with the reality, he wondered if this was what they called déjà vu. He screamed in desperation, asking if that wasn't a monster, then what could possibly be. Olivia calmly stated that it was their complete loss. She noted that Claudia and the rest seemed to be taking over the fort right now, so she didn't think he would be able to win. She added that since Mr. Broom was her enemy, she didn't mind what he called her. However, Broom wasn't done. He raised a handheld ballista, aiming it directly at her. The weapon fired with immense speed, but Olivia simply caught the projectile in her gloved hand, stopping it dead in its tracks. Broom muttered that as he thought, she really was a monster. He let out a dark, resigned laugh. Olivia looked at the bolt stuck in her palm, impressed. She exclaimed, "Wow." She commented that it was way stronger than a normal arrow and admitted she was a bit surprised by the impact. Olivia cheerfully asked Colonel Broom if she could have the handheld ballista he had tried to kill her with. Broom resignedly thought that the weapon was no use to him now anyway. Olivia then shouted that if he wanted it, he could have it, and proceeded to hurl the entire heavy crossbow directly at his face with terrifying strength. The weapon struck Broom, impaling him instantly. Blood dripped from the wound as he slumped over, thinking that he had expected this outcome. Olivia, meanwhile, hoisted the captured ballista onto her shoulder with a bright smile. She thanked him very much for the gift, promising to treasure it. She giggled to herself, thinking she needed to go show Ashton and Claudia her new toy. She mused that she had received a pocket watch before, and now she had acquired another interesting thing, treating war trophies like souvenirs from a gift shop. Elsewhere, Commanders Otto and Paul stared in disbelief. One of them shouted that it was impossible for Fort Casper to have already been taken. A soldier confirmed the news, reporting that the Special Brigade had already taken over the fort. He added that during the assault, they had suffered only 8 casualties. The commander was shocked by the low number, exclaiming 8. The soldier explained that most of the Imperial forces did not put up any resistance and simply surrendered, likely because they didn't want to end up like their colonel. Otto reflected on his decision, noting that knowing Lieutenant Olivia would be able to chip away at the enemy forces despite leading only a small attack force, he had tested out assigning her as the vanguard. He realized they would no longer be able to describe her accomplishments as simple heroism anymore, as she was basically a one-woman army. A soldier saluted and was ordered to pass along a message to Lieutenant Olivia to not let down her guard. The commander understood the situation but was still reeling from the fact that Fort Casper had fallen in only one day. Paul remarked that he didn't think Olivia would be satisfied with only cake now as a reward. He then suggested that, more importantly, the victory was likely the work of the temporarily appointed strategist, that new soldier named Ashton. Otto told him please don't joke around, though the idea that the bread maker was the mastermind behind the victory wasn't entirely wrong given his tunnel plan. Otto asked if anyone knew anything about Ashton, admitting this was the first time he was hearing about him. Olivia suddenly remembered Ashton mentioning that the bread in the capital was the best, and she felt she absolutely must eat it. When pressed for details about Ashton, Olivia simply stated that Ashton was just Ashton and that he was a human, a description that was as helpful as describing water as wet. 2 weeks later at Fort Casper, the scene shifted to the commander's office. Ashton asked Olivia why she had been staring at her pocket watch for the last few minutes. Olivia explained that she had never heard Lieutenant Colonel Otto was super strict about being on time, though she reasoned that being in the army obviously meant being on time was important. She then loudly introduced herself, Warrant Officer Claudia, and Private Ashton right in front of the door. Ashton panicked and tried to quiet her down, reminding her they were in front of the commander's office. Inside, Otto yelled for them to just come in since they were reporting right on time. He was surprised to learn Ashton was actually a private. The trio entered and saluted. Ashton was visibly nervous, especially upon realizing General Paul was also in the room, causing him to shiver. Olivia immediately brightened up and asked if they were getting cake. General Paul told them they hadn't been called there just for the sake of it, but acknowledged they had done well. Otto asked if cake was the only thing Olivia cared about. Olivia cheerfully replied that nope, not at all, she also liked reading books. Paul laughed, remarking that Lieutenant Olivia hadn't changed at all. Otto noted that there was certainly no problem with increasing one's own knowledge, but clarified they didn't call her to the commander's office just to ask about her fancies. Paul apologized, but informed Olivia that her beloved cake would have to wait until they returned to Fort Gallia. Olivia looked absolutely devastated by this news, her soul seemingly leaving her body. Paul then turned his attention to Private Ashton Zennefielder. Ashton responded with a yes, sir. Paul stated that he had heard the report from Warrant Officer Claudia regarding the assault on Fort Casper and wanted to first recognize Ashton's contribution. Ashton thanked him very much. General Paul began by stating that the assault on Fort Casper wouldn't have been possible in the first place if Lieutenant Olivia wasn't there. He recognized that without her, the fort would not have been taken so easily. Ashton, flustered and blushing, tried to interject that his own contribution was nothing compared to hers. However, Claudia chimed in, noting that she had heard the victory was also due to Private Ashton's strategy. Olivia enthusiastically agreed with Claudia, shouting that yes, that's right, they took the fort easily all because of Ashton. Otto immediately yelled at the two of them to stop because General Paul had not finished speaking yet. Olivia turned to Ashton and whispered that, by the way, he should speak to her formally in front of Lieutenant Colonel Otto, or he would get mad. Ashton was confused, wondering why she was telling him this now. General Paul then addressed Ashton directly. He mentioned that he heard Ashton's assignment as Lieutenant Olivia's strategist was a temporary one. He asked Ashton how about this. Ashton, realizing he had interrupted, apologized for his transgression. Paul reassured him that it was all right. Paul then asked Ashton if he would accept a position under Lieutenant Olivia as her official strategist. Ashton was completely shocked by the offer. He realized Paul was being serious. Internally, Ashton panicked. He thought to himself that he was simply lucky this time because of the books on military history and warfare he read occasionally. He felt he simply didn't have the confidence to imagine himself enacting strategies to deal with any situation. Olivia looked at Ashton with a warm, encouraging smile. Ashton looked back at her, thinking that her smile right here and right now wasn't fair. Placing his hand over his heart, Ashton declared that he would gladly accept the position, though he was unsure how much he would be able to contribute. Paul said, "Well said," and then asked for his thoughts. Ashton was shocked that this was happening right now but managed to say yes. Paul noted that though this was quite sudden, they would like to hear some of his thoughts as a strategist. Otto stepped in to help, telling Ashton there was no need to be so nervous and that first, Lieutenant Colonel Otto would explain the details. Lieutenant Colonel Otto listed the mountain of issues they now faced, which included dispatching forces to strategic positions, ensuring thorough scouting and surveillance, and taking back the nearby towns and villages controlled by the enemy. However, the most pressing issue was how to deal with the 4,000 prisoners of war they had captured. Although they succeeded in retaking the fort, they could not let their guard down until they decided on the next steps for taking Fortress Kiel. Keeping the prisoners fed was already not a trivial matter, and since there were no labor camps or mines in the vicinity of the fort to assign them to, they could not just have them executed either. Otto turned to the new strategist and asked what Private Ashton thought, inviting him to contribute any good suggestions, though his face certainly did not say please feel free. Ashton nervously suggested negotiating for a prisoner exchange with the Imperial forces. General Paul and Otto were intrigued and asked him to explain the details. Claudia helped explain that there were two merits to this plan. The first merit was immediately resolving the food problem if the negotiations succeeded. The second merit was the strengthening of the kingdom army with the return of their own soldiers. Ashton noted that regarding the latter, he believed the kingdom had more to benefit from this judging by the current state of affairs, though he worried if there was no meaning if the Empire received the same terms. Ashton elaborated that from a human rights standpoint, the Empire would have no choice but to come to the negotiation table. He reasoned that since soldiers like him, who could not even wield a weapon properly, were being sent to the front lines and would die immediately if caught off guard, the Empire would not dare disgrace the name of Emperor Ramuza, who was known across the continent. Otto pointed out that prisoner exchanges were usually negotiated when high-profile individuals were captured, like those connected to royalty, and there had been no precedents involving common soldiers. Despite the lack of precedent, General Paul stated that Ashton's suggestion was worthy of serious consideration. Otto agreed that it certainly was of value. Paul told Private Ashton that he looked forward to his future accomplishments. After the meeting, Paul asked Otto what he thought. Paul believed Ashton's ideas had potential. Otto admitted he also had no objections and felt that the strategies Ashton demonstrated in the capture of Fort Casper were not just a fluke. Paul mused that the idea of a prisoner exchange between common soldiers was not something he could have come up with. They agreed that it would be intolerable, even more so coming from the enemy, if an unprecedented idea like this was brought before them unexpectedly. While outside, Olivia, Ashton, and Claudia ran happily together. The scene shifts to the Earthbelt Empire's imperial capital, Alstead, specifically within the Grand Castle Lestrine. In Felix's office, Lieutenant Theresa, the adjutant to General Felix von Seeger, stands with a grim expression, delivering a devastating report. She reads from a document detailing the catastrophic losses, the fall of Fort Casper, the death of General Oswan and his subordinates, and the staggering loss of over 45,000 soldiers. General Felix von Seeger, the head of the Azure Knights, listens in silence. He reflects that, as he suspected, depriving General Oswan of the ideal opportunity to attack led to his inaction and eventual defeat. Felix regrets that he didn't voice more support for Oswan's perfect plan to assault Fort Gallia, even if it meant being reprimanded. He recalls the Emperor and Prime Minister d'Armes advising Oswan to merely observe the kingdom's movements for the time being, a decision that ultimately cost them the entire army. Theresa interrupts his somber thoughts to inform him that a meeting of the three generals has been scheduled to discuss this recent setback. Felix is surprised by the summons. Theresa explains that General of the Armies Gladen and General Rosen Marie have been recalled from their respective battlefronts to be briefed on the current status of the war. This gathering is per the direct order of Prime Minister d'Armes, commanding them to assemble in Conference Room No. 2 within 2 hours. The stage is set for the gathering of the Empire's 3 strongest generals to address the crisis. In Conference Room No. 2 of Castle Lestrain, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. General Rosemarie von Berlinetta, head of the Crimson Knights, stared at the report in front of her, her hand trembling slightly. She asked if the report of General Oswald's death was true. General Gladen von Hildesheimer, the leader of the Empire's 3 generals and head of the Sun Knights, confirmed it grimly. He stated there was no mistaking it. Testimonies from soldiers who fled to Fortress Kiel were clear. Numerous soldiers had reported seeing Oswald's head mounted on a spear. Felix von Sieger, head of the Azure Knights, observed Rosemary silently. He noted to himself that her desire to deny the report must be strong, considering she was Oswald's former chief officer. Unable to contain her grief and rage, Rosemary slammed her hand on the table and declared that she would head to the Southern Front immediately. She vowed to crush the 7th Army and whoever was responsible with her Crimson Knights, regardless of the cost. When Felix pointed out that her absence would leave the Northern Front without a commander, Rosemary dismissively told Gladen he could just fill in for her since he had lots of free time anyways. Gladen erupted in anger, calling her an ingrate. He reminded her that Felix had the essential role of defending the Imperial capital and could not be moved so foolishly. He questioned if she really thought her selfish whims would just happen. Rosemary scoffed, arguing that the current Kingdom Army did not possess the strength to invade the Empire, and insulted Gladen by saying the great general of the armies must be getting old if he thought otherwise. Gladen was offended, shouting, "How dare you?" Felix stepped in to mediate, agreeing that while the Kingdom Army currently lacked the strength to invade, his elite Azure Knights being permanently based in the capital, where the Emperor resided, set the masses at ease and acted as a strong deterrent against the ambitions of other nations. Firmly stated that without the explicit order of His Imperial Majesty, the Azure Knights could not be mobilized, though he admitted that an immediate response was still necessary regardless of General Rosemary's earlier outbursts. The presiding commander at the head of the long table grimly acknowledged the reality of the situation, noting that with the loss of Fort Casper, the Empire had now completely lost control over the southern regions of the kingdom. He requested a brief moment to address the matter properly. Prime Minister d'Armes, a hooded figure whose single visible eye gleamed with unsettling calm, immediately interjected. He declared that leaving the kingdom's southern region in its current state would not pose an issue. When another officer asked if His Excellency already had a plan in mind, d'Armes simply replied that he had nothing of that sort in particular. The commander was left thoroughly confused, demanding to know what exactly he meant by that vague statement. d'Armes clarified that the situation at the southern front was already a stalemate, and he saw no meaning in being obstinate about a previous strategy. He pointed out that as long as Fortress Kiel remained in Imperial hands, the Kingdom Army was unable to launch a sudden attack. The commander was forced to agree that this tactical assessment was true, though d'Armes casually reminded them that reports stated the death of over 45 Zalthosen Imperial soldiers during the campaign. He labeled the massive casualty count a truly regrettable tragedy and suggested they hold a moment of silence, though his demeanor suggested he was more interested in watching the room simmer than actually mourning. d'Armes then turned his attention to the commander, asking if His Imperial Majesty was aware of the loss of Fort Casper. The commander confirmed that he had already informed the Emperor. d'Armes added that, incidentally, His Imperial Majesty was also in agreement that the Empire should pull back from the kingdom's southern region. General Rosemary, who had been vibrating with fury over the defeat, was momentarily stunned by this revelation. She noticed with creeping dread that the Prime Minister had actually smiled while delivering the news of the retreat. The commander immediately snapped at her, shouting that now was not the time for trivial matters and demanding to know how she planned to take revenge for General Oswald under these circumstances. Rosemary was left speechless, internally screaming about what part of avenging a fallen general could possibly be considered trivial. d'Armes, ever the master of quiet manipulation, calmly addressed General Rosemary and whispered that her chance at revenge may unexpectedly come sooner than she expected, leaving the entire room trapped in a heavy, suspicious silence. In the conference room at Castle Lestrain, Prime Minister d'Armes laid out a chilling prediction. He stated that based on the situation so far, the kingdom forces that had taken Fort Casper would likely not move on to Fort Gallia, since they could establish a strong defensive line along their current location. When a subordinate asked what this had to do with getting revenge for General Oswan, the Prime Minister's words were clearly intended to rile up General Rosenmary. Darmies claimed this was simply his prediction, but the strategic implications were already forming. A map of the front lines showed the Empire's dilemma. Upon establishing a defensive line in their southern region, the kingdom's forces would only advance on one of either the central or northern front. The reasoning was that the kingdom army was not leaving any military strength in reserve, forcing them to push forward. Darms noted that he couldn't fathom the current kingdom army doing otherwise. Rosenmary, processing this information, realized the true nature of the plan. She summarized that in short, she just needed to drag those forces to the northern front, whether they liked it or not. Darms praised her, noting that she was quick on the uptake, as expected of General Rosenmary. 3 days after the meeting, per decree of Emperor Ramuza, orders were dispatched for the complete withdrawal of the Imperial army from the kingdom's southern regions, setting the trap in motion. Meanwhile, at the newly captured Fort Casper, Lieutenant Olivia and Claudia were engaging in a friendly spar. Claudia warned that although it was a friendly spar, she would not be holding back. Olivia casually replied that she would try not to injure her, so she shouldn't worry, completely missing the tension in the air. Claudia was internally fuming, thinking that Olivia was making light of her. She realized with a shock that she had never experienced such a massive gap in ability, not even from her father, who was one of the kingdom's 10 swords. Olivia stood ready, sensing an overwhelming difference in swordsmanship due to her training and devotion to the sword, a gap that simply could not be overcome. Undeterred by the terrifying realization that she was essentially challenging a natural disaster to a duel, Claudia charged forward, declaring "Here I come" as she launched her attack. The sparring session began with a resounding clang as Claudia's sword met Olivia's defense. Claudia grunted in exertion, feeling entirely like a toddler trying to fight a grown adult with a foam bat. The swords clashed again and again, but Olivia blocked every single strike with a casual smile, not even breaking a sweat while Claudia was already panting. Claudia realized with a sinking feeling that her father, who was considered one of the kingdom's 10 swords, wasn't even worthy of comparison to this girl. Olivia had already transcended normal strength and entered the realm of heroes celebrated in myths and legends. Simply calling her strong was a massive understatement. Suddenly, Olivia announced that it was her turn now. Before Claudia could even blink, Olivia closed the distance in an instant, moving so fast that despite Claudia keeping her guard up, she couldn't react in time. Olivia delivered a swift kick that sent Claudia flying backward with a gasp. As Claudia tumbled to the ground, Olivia leaned in close and complimented her, noting that she had really good eyes which seemed pretty handy. This was likely a reference to Claudia's ability to perceive the gap in their skill, though it sounded suspiciously like a creepy pickup line. Olivia cheerfully asked if she wanted to keep going. Claudia, lying on the ground and sweating profusely, internally screamed that her commander was absolutely creepy, but externally, she politely apologized and enthusiastically agreed to continue. Standing back up with her sword raised, Claudia declared that she was ready for round 2, proving that her masochistic dedication to training was just as strong as her swordsmanship. Claudia stood frozen in confusion as Olivia vanished from her line of sight yet again. Frantically spinning around with a whirl, she tried to anticipate the attack, thinking that surely this time she would catch her. But before she could even finish the thought, Olivia reappeared directly behind her, casually resting the tip of her sword against Claudia's neck and telling her to freeze. Olivia smiled and complimented Claudia, stating that she was actually quite strong and must have trained very hard. However, she also gave a friendly warning that Claudia shouldn't use her eyes too much because it looked really tiring. Claudia, feeling the strain, admitted that her eyes did feel drained. She reflected internally that she had never revealed the true nature of her eyes to anyone else before. Ever since her closest childhood friend found the power creepy, she had kept it hidden, and even she didn't know much about it. Claudia asked if Olivia knew exactly what her power was. Olivia confirmed she did, mentioning she had been taught a lot of things. When Claudia asked who her teacher was, Olivia playfully dodged the question, saying she would tell her someday. Claudia then guessed that the move where Olivia disappeared was called the flash step technique. Olivia confirmed this was correct and explained that the technique she used just now was the same one. She added that if it was Claudia, she might actually be able to learn it too, though she admitted she got tired if she used it too much. Claudia was shocked and excited by the possibility. Suddenly shifting gears from combat to cuisine, Olivia announced that she was already hungry and it was time for breakfast. Claudia, seizing the opportunity, asked to be taught the technique next time, and Olivia agreed. To show her gratitude for the sparring session, Claudia offered to treat Lieutenant Olivia to the special breakfast set that morning. The narration noted that this set came with an additional charge and was quite expensive, which was likely the only reason Olivia was so enthusiastic about the offer. Olivia cheered happily and sprinted toward the cafeteria, shouting for Claudia to hurry up. Claudia, resigned to her fate as the wallet for this operation, chased after her lieutenant, calling out her title as they ran. 1 month after the recapture of Fort Casper, Ashton found himself roped into military affairs, acting as Lieutenant Colonel Otto's personal aide during the closed-door negotiations for a prisoner exchange. From a human rights standpoint, Ashton had suggested the exchange, and as predicted, the Empire accepted. However, the Empire requested a controversial condition for the agreement. The signing ceremony would take place at Fortress Kiel, deep within enemy territory. The kingdom officers were incensed by this demand. They shouted that they were the victors and should hold the ceremony at Fort Casper, questioning why they had to enter enemy land at all. General Paul, meanwhile, sat calmly drinking tea, lamenting that being a leader was hard. He internally cursed Otto, calling him a rascal for not being there to handle the mess, though it was Paul himself who had ordered Otto away on inspections in the first place. The officers continued to protest the Empire's demand to limit the kingdom's escort to just 100 men. They argued this was an invitation for an assassination attempt. Paul dismissed their fears, claiming that 100 men were sufficient to ward off bandits, but few enough not to appear as a threat in enemy territory, calling it a well-thought-out plan. When the officers fell silent, intimidated by his glare and asking if they had anything more to say, Paul dropped the final bombshell this time. His personal escort would be Lieutenant Olivia. He confidently stated he couldn't imagine the Empire resorting to underhanded means given their disadvantageous position, effectively silencing any further objections with the sheer confidence that his personal monster could handle anything. The officers, initially terrified, immediately scrambled to agree with General Paul's decision. They shouted that they had no objections if Lieutenant Olivia was acting as the escort, insisting that nothing would go wrong if she was there, before practically tripping over themselves to excuse themselves and leave the room. A week later, General Paul and his company departed Fort Casper, setting their course north toward Fortress Kiel. As they rode, General Paul pointed out the massive structure in the distance, noting to Olivia that it was what was once celebrated as the impregnable Fortress Kiel. Olivia was instantly awestruck, exclaiming loudly that the fortress was so much bigger and cooler than Fort Gallia. Paul, looking slightly wary of her volume, reminded her that the fortress was once the kingdom's, but was taken by the Empire due to the incompetence of their troops. Olivia simply replied that she knew, and cheerfully stated that if it was taken, they just needed to take it back, exactly like they did with Fort Casper. Paul chuckled at her simplicity, while Claudia found it strange that hearing Olivia say it with such confidence made her feel like they actually could easily do so. The group then approached the massive, closed gates of the enemy stronghold. The heavy iron gates of Fortress Kiel groaned open with a resounding thunk, revealing a line of stoic, armored Imperial soldiers standing at attention. General Paul and his entourage rode in, greeted immediately by a woman in a crisp Imperial uniform. She saluted sharply, acknowledging the Kingdom General, His Excellency Paul. She expressed that it was an honor to meet him, noting that his fame as a demon on the battlefield was well known even within the Imperial Army. Introducing herself as Lieutenant Theresa, their guide for the stay, she graciously invited them to rest from their travels. As they moved deeper into the fortress, passing through Gate No. 2 and approaching Gate No. 3, Lieutenant Theresa dropped a condition. Citing security purposes, she kindly requested that only 2 of Paul's guards accompany him any further, stating that rooms had been prepared for the rest of the escort to rest. Claudia, ever the protective vice commander, was instantly outraged, shouting for her to hold it right there and calling it a suspiciously convenient request. Paul, however, remained calm, placing a hand on her shoulder and telling her it was fine. He designated Lieutenant Olivia and Warrant Officer Claudia as the 2 who would escort him. Theresa looked momentarily flustered by the choice of the terrifying monster girl as an escort, but quickly recovered, apologizing and inviting the trio inside. The official ceremony for the prisoner exchange was held the next morning in a grand hall lined with massive pillars. General Paul stood before his counterpart, General Felix, the head of the renowned Azure Knights. The atmosphere was tense but polite. Felix admitted that his spine tingled as their eyes met, acknowledging Paul's fearsome reputation as a demon on the battlefield. Paul returned the sentiment, stating it was an honor to finally meet the head of the Azure Knights. Felix then remarked that Paul was younger than he had expected, to which Paul simply replied that he heard that very often, while Olivia and Claudia stood stoically behind him. The ceremony concluded smoothly, maintaining a pleasant atmosphere on the surface, but General Felix was visibly shaken. He turned to General Paul with a look of shock, asking if he was feeling unwell, likely trying to mask his own disturbance at the overwhelming presence he had just felt. Later, Felix spoke with Lieutenant Theresa behind bars, inquiring if the kingdom's delegation had departed. When she confirmed they had just left, he asked if she had spoken with the two officers escorting General Paul. Theresa replied that she hadn't particularly. Felix remarked that he was very surprised to learn that one of the escorts held the same rank as him, a lieutenant, and was quite young. Felix's expression turned grim as he reflected on the encounter. He had sensed an abnormal scent of blood and a lingering sense of killing radiating from the young girl. To him, it felt as if the very embodiment of death had been standing right in front of him. He realized with dread that this girl, Olivia, might very well become a serious threat to the Empire. 1 month later, the political landscape had shifted. The coalition army returned to Fort Gallia, while Lieutenant Elman and 8,000 troops remained to garrison the newly recaptured Fort Casper. General Lambert and Colonel Neinhardt continued on to the capital to deliver their report. Meanwhile, at Fort Gallia, Claudia knocked on a door. Olivia's voice called out for her to enter before Claudia had even announced herself. Claudia stepped inside to find Olivia lying on the floor, surrounded by a messy pile of books. Claudia wondered how Olivia knew it was her, but Olivia simply pointed out that Claudia was making a funny face. Flustered, Claudia rubbed her cheeks, realizing she had let her guard down and relaxed her expression without noticing. Regaining her composure, Claudia announced that she had good news and told Olivia not to be too surprised when she heard it. Claudia burst into the room with excitement, holding up a document that bore the grand crest of 2 lions. She announced to Olivia that she had been awarded the Medal of the Golden Lion, a prestigious honor. Olivia, lying amidst her books, stared blankly at the news and simply replied, "Well." Claudia chuckled, noting that she somehow knew Olivia wouldn't be surprised anyway. When Olivia's reaction remained flat, Claudia laughed again, "Foo-foo," and leaned in with a mischievous grin, telling her that she was only saying that now because she hadn't heard the rest of the news yet, implying there was a significant catch or detail she was about to drop on her unsuspecting commander. And that's a wrap on Part 3. Things are only getting more intense from here. But before you go, I want to leave you with one question to think about. If you could reset one decision in your life, not to escape the pain, but to make a braver choice, what would it be? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely read every single one. Now, if you want Part 4, you know what to do. Comment the word spider down below. Enough spiders and it drops next week. And if this recap helped you out, hit that like button. Subscribe so you never miss a recap, and I'll catch you in the next one. Stay epic. Peace.